Chapter 431. Amidst the freezing air that covered the sky, the black-haired young man's body was like an arrow that was released from a bow. Behind him, the heresy army raised their swords and cheered. The judge's morale was also greatly boosted. The battle between the two didn't last long, but in this short period of time, Luoya and Brian displayed spells that were far beyond anyone's imagination. Especially the power of the Gulan Daer, which deeply shocked everyone present. Was Brian Eric, or Ferd Eric, such a weak enemy? Luoya didn't have Pei Tila's blessing on him, which meant that he was only at the 4th level of source rank. Although he and the Gulan Daer used all their strength to attack, and the frozen earth maker had almost no defensive means, under normal circumstances, there would be some unexpected situations when facing a 2nd-level source rank expert, let alone Brian. Thinking of this, the young man didn't dare to be careless. He stopped and stretched out his hands again. Without any allies nearby, the freezing air was finally released by Luoya. The white air in the sky squeezed up and down, as if converging into a giant mouth that could swallow everything, and pounced on the man on the ground. However, this time, Luoya miscalculated. On the empty plains, a third person's voice suddenly sounded. A man in a long robe that was formed from gray fog appeared beside Brian. The moment the black-haired youth saw him, the pupils of the golden-haired man suddenly shrank, while the golden-haired man on the ground had a calm expression. The Collector was the nickname given to the leader of the organization by the members of the Appraisal Association. No one knew his identity, and no one had seen his face. For more than 100 years, Brian had only met him in that dark room. He seemed to be omniscient, but he also seemed to be hiding from something. The blood in his body seemed to boil with the power of the curse. The source material of the crown trembled uncontrollably as if it felt hostility. At this moment, the crown stone emitted a violent light. Under the full activation, the ancient beast seemed to have been revived by Luoya's hands. The freezing air was suddenly activated, and it turned into a beam of light that cut through the night sky. Just like that, the touch of frigid earth continued to move forward as if nothing could stop it. Everything seemed to end with this attack. But what the young man didn't expect was that the gray figure that suddenly appeared didn't dodge. Instead, it faced the freezing air head-on. Ever since it became Luoya's skill, whether it was against a god or a human, the freezing air that had never failed seemed to have failed this time. The light attack didn't freeze the enemy, but instead retreated to the sides. In the dark space in the distance, the man's main body looked at the young man in the image and stretched out his hand. However, at the moment when the two sides touched, the source of the crown in Roha's body suddenly changed. The intense trembling stopped inexplicably and the shining light gradually dimmed. The black-haired boy's eyes widened as he felt a strange feeling. I remember this place. The candlelight was still shining in the darkness, but a hand had reached out from the darkness. It appeared silently, but it seemed like it had always been there. As the hand approached the candlelight, a strong sense of uneasiness appeared in the young man's heart. This thought appeared almost instinctively in Luoya's heart, but he couldn't move. His body couldn't feel, and his consciousness was hazy. Everything told Luoya that in this dark space, he was just a bystander. At this moment, Luoya suddenly felt a bone-piercing cold, as if the disappearance of the candlelight had taken away his warmth. The flickering candlelight seemed to be struggling, but the boundless darkness became heavier and heavier. Finally, everything returned to normal. It was also at this moment that the black-haired young man's consciousness returned to his body, accompanied by the sudden stop of his blood. How is this possible? Chapter 432. On the plains, Brian looked at the huge skeleton walking past him. In the dark space, the man with a blurry face also turned around and prepared to leave. From their point of view, they had achieved their goal, and there was no need to pay attention to the gradually blurring youth. When the freezing of his bloodline and source substance stopped, he lost the protection of the gods and was hit by Brian's gray fog. His fate was already sealed. In fact, Luoya's figure had indeed begun to dissipate and was no longer moving. However, what the two of them didn't know was that the youth's consciousness still existed at this moment. Something had to be done. But the problem was, how could the crown, the king's blood, be interfered with? Death was scary, but what was even scarier was the result after death. Without his protection, the heresy army and the judges who could not fight against the gods would be completely annihilated. And behind everyone, the princess that the young man swore to protect would also die. What you lack is the core of your faith. Remember it in a second. Active mutation. This was the foundation of stepping into this darkness. Only by finding the core of oneself and reactivating the power of the Akut family would Luoya have a chance of survival. Hanks was a devout believer, so he used his faith as the core and practiced it in his life. Then, did Luoya have something to support him as well? It was in the dark palace. At the end of the building, a man with blonde hair and blue eyes stood. His handsome face was like a sculpture in art, but there was also a unique rebellious and untamed air about him. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and flashing lightning illuminated his figure, allowing the youth to see his face clearly. The moment he saw Vader, Luoya widened his eyes in surprise. He didn't understand why he saw his figure. Such a question flashed through the youth's mind, but he immediately denied it. This was because the moment he saw Vader, a scorching heat suddenly appeared in his body, as if it was resisting the power that was dragging him into the darkness. It was also at this moment that Luoya suddenly felt as if he had grasped something crucial. I see. It's because of a certain similarity. Prince Vader was Luoya's former enemy. The two of them were very different in terms of personality, ideals, and many other aspects. They were even contradictory. However, these two people who were as incompatible as fire and water had a part in common, and that was resistance. Luoya, you're rebelling against fate. The holy capital was engulfed in the flames of war, the majestic ocean, the despairing and chaotic academy, the all-devouring calamity was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in front of him. Even the strongest human beings were trying to kill him. The Messiah, the Mother Goddess, each and every one of the highest existences wanted to kill him. However, just like the ancestors of the Akut family, even though the fate of death followed him like a shadow, it was unable to suppress his head. Rebelling and changing fate, this is my core. Boundless power began to converge and pulsate. In the dark space, it was as if a candle flame that was about to be extinguished suddenly flickered despite the absence of wind. The flickering candle flame burned brighter and brighter, finally bursting out with an intense radiance. The black-haired youth strode forward, reached out his hand and grabbed the palm in the darkness, as if he was grabbing the throat of fate. Under the illumination of the light, the black-haired youth's eyes were like candlelight. He looked directly at the figure in the darkness, his voice flat but unquestionable. It's time for you to return what you've taken away. Chapter 433. Luoya Akut was defeated. Just a minute ago, the black-haired boy was still chasing after Brian, who was sent flying by the giant. He planned to launch a final attack, but in just a few seconds, everything had taken a turn for the worse. Looking at the gray figure that disappeared after the attack and Brian who stood up, everyone understood that this was a conspiracy. Brian and the others' target was the black-haired boy from the beginning, and it turned out that they had succeeded. Everything happened so suddenly that even the pagans did not have time to react. Cynthia, who was holding a shield, was stiff. Rodney, who was waving a long sword, also stopped. The white-haired would looked into the distance, as if he still could not believe what he had seen. Brian had a powerful divine power, which was difficult for the pagans and the Inquisition to fight against. As long as Luoya died, there would be no more suspense in this battle. In the eyes of the red-haired man, Luoya was indeed on the verge of death. His power was sealed by the strange gray mist figure, and his body was gradually being erased over time. Even so, the boy still had a chance. Recalling the boy who came all the way to the border with him, Hank's eyes gradually calmed down. He had seen too many young talents, but he felt that only Luoya would not die here. This was his confidence in his vision. Before he could advance, he must buy time. Crack. At this moment, the collector suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. Everything around him instantly dimmed, and the flickering candlelight appeared beside him. Under the candlelight, the black-haired boy had already grabbed his wrist. The cold spell extended along his body, and his cold eyes were mixed with murderous intent. In an instant, the man suddenly withdrew his arm, and the cold air had covered half of his body. In the dark space, the boy had also taken back his bloodline and glory. To be able to capture his body in that world, it meant that the young awakened had found his own essence, the root of his beliefs. No one in the Holy Church could extinguish his candlelight, and the king's blood would be completely activated. The man in the room stared at the shining light on the medium in silence. In the distant plains, in Brian's blue eyes, incomprehensible things were also emerging. Kings standing with swords, ferocious beasts, holy angels and dragons spreading their wings, and ancient creatures flashed past one by one. Gods and demons also turned into fleeting clouds as the pressure kept increasing. Finally, a glowing figure appeared. The moment he appeared, even the most ferocious villains trembled like children who had done something wrong. Devout believers called out his name. The moment he saw the scene in the sky, the man's body and mind trembled, and the gray mist also scattered in fear. Hanks looked at the strange scene, and hurriedly lowered his head, and his eyes were full of shock. The ancient bloodline awakened and displayed its ancient glory. His frozen body began to burn. The black-haired youth looked up at the sky. The shining figure reached out a warm hand to touch his head. As the origin substance of the crown trembled, he seemed to see the goddess in the light smiling warmly at him. "You have received Shia's blessing." Chapter 434. At the mountain range at the end of the Tark Plains, a violent earthquake stopped the soldiers who were repairing the fortifications. The people who came and went crouched down to stabilize themselves. The demons in the mountains were restless, and flocks of birds were circling the sky. Under the support of the crimson lightning and the shard of the crown, the mighty power of the gods once again shone upon the world after so many years. Under the concentrated attack of Granadar's full power, the evil god that was like a gray fog was defeated. The black slash that wiped out everything was also burned and shattered inch by inch under the attack of the lightning. Countless remnant souls were reduced to dust, and the golden-haired man who was the instigator of all this also met his end. The moment he sighed in his heart, the lightning struck the man in the face. The red light that drowned everything also wrapped him in it. The blade in his hand was completely shattered, and he could no longer feel his body. However, under the bombardment of the red lightning, Brian's face was not filled with pain and resentment, but a moment of absent-mindedness. "Your Highness," boom. The soldiers put their shields in front of them and lowered their bodies. The judges also prostrated themselves on the ground. The cultists who sensed that the situation was not good jumped up and tried to escape. However, the red lightning that fell from the sky became the knell of death, burning all the villains who were not protected by the group's skills into ashes. 1 second to remember. The aftermath of the battle between the two swept across the plains and lasted for a long time. When the wind gradually subsided, the light disappeared, and the lightning and dark clouds were far away. Luoya opened his eyes again and looked at his own body. At this time, the plains had turned into sand under the impact of the divine power, and the golden-haired man was lying in the sand. The powerful aura of the man had disappeared. His body that had survived a long time was now full of holes. However, after losing the evil god and the souls, there was nothing left to replenish him. In the face of the red lightning, Brian didn't try to avoid it, he didn't even try to fight back. He just silently endured it as if it wasn't unacceptable for him to fall. When Roja saw the man's eyes, he understood everything. Red lightning roar. That's His Highness' skill. You are, I'm not him. A short answer, followed by a sigh of disappointment after a silence. The golden-haired man's eyes flashed with disappointment, and Luoya continued. I see. You don't seem to mind that I defeated him. His Highness doesn't hold grudges. It's an acknowledgement that he gave you the skill. I'm his knight. His acknowledgement is the principle that I need to follow. Perhaps it's my destiny to die in your hands. Looking at the man who was burning his life to the end, Luoya responded indifferently. There was no pity in his heart. He only sighed at the complexity and changeability of human nature. Luoya didn't know why Brian chose to be resurrected. Perhaps it was to avenge his old master, perhaps it was because of the regret of his family's decline, or perhaps it was because of his persistence in success. But no matter what, the young man knew that he had lost his original heart, and his journey had come to an end. Noah Iyer is actually his descendant. The moment the young man said those words, the golden-haired man opened his eyes slightly and looked at the young man in front of him. In the haze, he seemed to see the figure of a golden-haired knight holding a long sword. So that's how it is. Did Knight lose tonight? Be careful of that person. He knows you very well. Who is he? Do you know his identity? The drifting dust was blown away by the night wind. Under the dusky sky, Brian ended his life full of twists and turns. The old enemy of the Akkad family for more than 100 years was gone. The burning flames of karmic retribution slowly extinguished, and an era came to an end. Luoya didn't want to think too deeply about Brian's good deeds and evil deeds. To the young man, Brian was just one of the many enemies. Perhaps if Vader didn't die, Brian could become a loyal subordinate as Felder. But that was nothing more than a wild guess. The black-haired young man sighed. The man's bones were burned to ashes, and the tiger flag was burned as well. After more than 100 years, everything was no longer the same as before. After saying goodbye, the young man turned around and walked away in the sandstorm. The battle between Luoya and Brian wasn't long or short, but the outcome and the process could be described as shocking. On the plains, after experiencing the aftermath of the Gulen Dayer's attack and witnessing the death of Brian, the vice president of the Appraisal Association, the cultists who followed Luoya here were in a complete panic. Those who tried to escape were killed on the spot by the heresy army and the judges, and most of them surrendered immediately. Whether it was the appearance of Shia's phantom in the sky, or the power displayed by the Gulen Dayer, all of them dealt a heavy blow to the cultist spirits. After the successive attacks, many of them had completely lost their will to fight. When they saw Luoya return, their legs trembled and they collapsed on the ground. Looking at Luoya, who had broken through to level 3 of the source rank, a rare smile appeared on Hank's face. The judges, who were serious in speech and manner, also showed respect. As someone who could draw out Shia's phantom, Luoya's status in the hearts of these devout Shia believers rose rapidly. In terms of ability, the young man had proven himself with his battle achievements. Looks like you found the root of your beliefs. Very good. Count Hanks, what you said gave me a lot of inspiration. That's why I was able to break through successfully. Thank you. The serious man calmly rejected this sudden achievement, making Luoya not know whether to laugh or cry. After a brief exchange, the black-haired young man turned his head and looked into the depths of the plains. Hanks also fell into silence. Both of them knew that it was not over yet. But of course, Luoya would not let that happen, and he had already made preparations for it. Well, it's my job to deal with criminals. It was the holy city floating in the clouds, emitting a holy white light. Clouds and mist lingered around it, and the sun shone on it, making people feel warm just by looking at it. Tranquility and peace flowed in their hearts like a warm current. It was the legendary City of Angels, a magnificent building built by the gods in ancient times. It floated in the clouds, symbolizing the authority of the messengers of God, and also represented the glory bestowed by Shia. The moment she arrived, solemn music sounded in her ears. The people coming and going stopped in their tracks and bowed to her with a smile. Under the respectful escort of the crowd, the blonde girl walked all the way. She walked past the majestic city tower and crossed one door after another. After a wide corridor, there was a meeting hall with 7 chairs. 7 archangels. The 7 archangels walked past one by one, but after shaking their heads in denial, their expressions became more and more respectful. They clustered around the blonde girl and smiled as they led her deeper into the city. The moment Noah Iyer saw the woman on the throne, there was a sudden restlessness in her body. A strong sense of intimacy broke out in her body, and when she saw the blonde girl, the holy and beautiful woman on the throne's solemn expression thawed. She stood up and smiled as she walked forward. Looking at the queen walking towards her, Nuala Ayer's mind gradually went blank. The restlessness of her blood made her emotional, and the strong sense of intimacy seemed to tell her that the person in front of her was an existence that she could completely trust. In the depths of her heart, a strange feeling began to rise. The emotions in the girl's heart were in a mess, and on the other side, the Holy Queen extended her hand and smiled in invitation. After hesitating for a moment, Nuala Ayer finally responded. But the moment she extended her hand, the girl's eyes involuntarily stared at her wrist, and an inexplicable question emerged in her heart. There was something missing here. Chapter 435. Inside the Holy Palace, the gentle light shone in all directions. Under the throne, the attendants and guards bowed their heads respectfully. The 7 archangels surrounded the girl with a smile. The king with a kind face reached out her hand, waiting for the girl to respond. However, under everyone's gaze, the blonde girl looked at her wrist in front of her in a daze. Such a question arose in Nuala Ayer's heart. The surging blood cooled down slightly, and the surging emotions in her heart stopped slightly. The girl surrounded by everyone suddenly frowned. She looked at her smooth wrist and inexplicably felt that something was wrong. She seemed to have forgotten something important. Thinking about this problem, the girl who suddenly felt a headache withdrew her hand and held her forehead. A few inexplicable images suddenly flashed in her mind. However, before she could think of anything, her shoulder was suddenly held. The girl who suddenly woke up raised her head and found that it was the blonde woman wearing a crown in front of her. She still maintained a smile on her face. She didn't seem to care about Nuala Ayer's rudeness. Beside her, the handsome and beautiful angels didn't show any abnormalities. They didn't seem to see the girl's expression and slight bitterness. This time, the beautiful woman didn't wait any longer. Instead, she smiled and took the initiative to hold the young girl's hand, leading her forward. The 7 archangels followed her step by step. When they reached the platform, the young girl stopped in her tracks. Meanwhile, more and more angels poured out from both sides. She seemed to have experienced such a scene before. An indescribable sense of dissonance emerged in her heart, making the girl begin to be vigilant. The music and singing also slowly stopped at this time. The 7 archangels stepped forward one by one under the respectful gaze of the guests. They held the blonde girl with both hands and blessed her one by one. Under the layers of light, Nuala Ayer's body seemed to be gushing with endless energy. After the blessings of the 7 archangels, the blonde girl turned around and looked at the woman on the throne behind her. At this time, the majestic king had a gratified smile on her face. She stood up and walked to the girl. Under everyone's gaze, she gently took off the crown on her head. Looking at the crown in the woman's hand, the blood in the girl's body surged violently. The holy white crown seemed to have a strange magic in her eyes at this moment, making her want to own it. She intuitively felt that at the moment of coronation, she would get unparalleled power and power. Holy white. Wait, the curse vessel of this color, I remember, the holy white curse vessel was indeed what she cherished and wanted to own. However, it was not this. Click. Looks like you don't need my help. Of course, who do you think I am? You hurt the most important person to me, and you still dare to appear in front of me as if nothing happened? My bloodline may indeed be inherited from you, but my power was not bestowed upon me by you. In order to reappear in the world, you had to succumb to the tyranny of divinity. What right do you have to crown me? The trembling crown floated in the air, and everything around it seemed to lose its color. The holiness of the huge palace faded away, and the light in the shining space was extinguished. Glory and power shrank towards the crown, and finally landed gently on the girl's palms. At this moment, there was a sudden uproar in the vast space. The angel kings resisted the pressure and stepped forward to stop them. The 7 archangels were also shocked. However, all the obstacles were useless. The holy white crown had become the best endorsement, proving to everyone where honor and power belonged. Chapter 436. After a soul-stirring night, the black-haired young man and the golden-haired girl had both overcome their own difficulties and defeated their fated enemies. When they returned to the familiar wooden house, the two of them looked at each other and sighed with emotion. "You've advanced to source level 3. So it's like this. I thought I could suppress you with my strength, but now it's another starting line. But, it's better to be safe than sorry. Congratulations on your successful advancement." The black-haired boy shook his head helplessly. This incident gave him a new understanding of the so-called Chosen One. After breaking through the bloodline and source level, Nuo Ayer's combat power had increased exponentially. In fact, even Luoya wouldn't dare to say he could win against her. After recognizing the strength of Nuo Ayer, the black-haired boy was relieved. However, a question flashed through the boy's mind. Luoya vaguely remembered that Nuo Ayer's bloodline didn't seem to be this strong in the recorder's eye. The princess was stronger than expected. This was undoubtedly a good thing, but the boy didn't have a clue as to the reason for all this. The biggest factor affecting Nuo Ayer was Luoya himself, but the boy didn't do anything in this regard. Feeling the dense reaction of the curse, Luoya and Nuo Ayer tidied up their clothes and walked out of the room. When the two stepped out of the door, the blonde princess appeared in front of everyone in one piece. Uncontrollable cheers came from the crowd. After the princess was safe, the Saint Maester theocracy would regain its stability. The Vatican would once again play its role. The warriors who died in battle could finally rest in peace. All their efforts would be rewarded. Before this, Luoya's team had a fierce battle with the cultists of the Appraisal Association. Many warriors died in this battle. Nuo Ayer's face was heavy when she heard the news. However, as the head of the Inquisition, Hanks was very calm. Luoya's expression was also normal. After witnessing the strength of the enemy, the casualties now were the best result. However, all of this was in the past. With the death of Brian and the annihilation of his henchmen, the Appraisal Association had suffered a devastating blow. Without the cover provided by the Eric family, such a large cult could no longer hide in the theocracy. Roja didn't say this out of pity, and he didn't have any sympathy. In fact, the Eric family wouldn't change because of Brian's words. But he felt that as a descendant of Vader, Noelle had the right to know the fate of the man who followed her ancestor, and even when he died, she couldn't forget him. "You don't seem to sympathize with him." The golden-haired girl sighed and raised her head. She looked at the boy beside her and asked. "Because of separation, I need to remember. But I won't. I will always be by your side." Hearing the boy's calm reply, the blonde girl's eyes widened slightly. Her cheeks flushed and her lips trembled. In the next moment, the holy white chain suddenly appeared in the girl's hand. The angel girl blushed slightly and dragged the boy in front of her. She stared into his eyes and said with embarrassment and anger. Chapter 437. On the broad road, the black-haired young man looked at the majestic buildings in front of him and sighed. It was evening, and the sunset was just like when he left. A gentle breeze blew on his face, bringing warmth. Facing this familiar scene, Luoya didn't look at it anymore. Instead, he walked forward with familiarity. The young man didn't understand why he had to spend a lot of time walking like a pilgrimage to this land. However, Altacia didn't seem to want to give in. Looking at Altacia, who raised her finger and happily answered his question, the black-haired young man couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. "It's similar. Or rather, I think our relationship is closer, isn't it? After all, the contract can't be broken. To a certain extent, our relationship is more certain and stronger." Hearing the white-haired witch's joyful words, Luoya pondered for a moment and didn't say anything. In fact, as Altacia said, Luoya and the ancient gods were almost inseparable. They were bound together for good or ill. To a certain extent, they could even be considered family, especially in this situation. Of course, this is the most difficult and dangerous victory for Sir Hero. After offering the blessings of victory to my contractor, you have successfully responded to my expectations. Then, after everything is over, it's necessary to reward you. And most importantly, make the guy who dared to humiliate me disappear completely. Completely destroy the divinity of the Angel King. Even in ancient times, almost no one could do it. Really, Sir Hero, don't tell me you think that girl alone can do it? It's you who changed her fate, just like how you found the foundation of your power. You have indeed done it, and you have also satisfied my pleasure. Yes, Sir Hero, you really never disappoint me. But, you didn't call me here just for this, right? The white-haired witch paused after hearing Luo Ya's question. The smile on her face faded a little. Below the throne, the black-haired young man also showed an expectant expression. The Earth Mother, who was overflowing with maternal love, was concerned about her child after the battle. This was understandable behavior. However, the relationship between the witch and the young man was very complicated. Since Altacia was in such a hurry to see Luoya, there must be something she had to remind him of. And to a certain extent, Luoya knew what it was. Sniffing the strong ominous aura on Luoya, Altacia's gaze gradually sharpened as she asked. The black-haired young man recalled the previous battle and thought for a moment before concluding. What? Ever since she saw the Queen of Witches until now, this was the first time Altacia showed such a surprised expression in front of him. In the past, even in moments of life and death, this unpredictable woman was never nervous. However, this time, Luo Ya's words seemed to have impacted her, and the reason was probably the last sentence. Looking at the witch who had a much more serious expression after sitting down again, Luo Ya said almost confidently. The white-haired woman heard him and did not refute. After all, as an ancient god, Altacia had a lot of knowledge. She had also done a lot of research on the ancient bloodline of the King Selector clan. The witch had indeed heard of the meaning of the Sacred Hall. The Sacred Hall is the legendary holy land of the King Selector clan. It is also the place where the beginning and the end. However, legend has it that only those who are qualified can enter that area. Yes, I don't know the specific situation. Perhaps it is some kind of unique secret technique, or perhaps it is some kind of bloodline connection. In short, it is not a place that just anyone can enter. Chapter 438. What does it feel like to be an ordinary patient? The answer to this question was a little unfamiliar to Luoya. It was better to say that he hadn't felt it for a long time. Feeling the slightly hot and chaotic brain and the limbs that seemed to be filled with lead compared to usual, Luoya sighed helplessly. On the other side, the sound of the door opening sounded. Princess Royal Highness returned soon after leaving, and Luoya hurriedly closed his eyes. Although asking you to sleep is an order, you don't have to pretend to sleep. I just want you to have a good rest, not to make me happy. Hearing Noah Ayer's words, the black-haired boy's body stiffened. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly opened his eyes. He found that the girl was already sitting on the chair beside the bed with a determined expression on her face. She was obviously confident in her judgment. How many times do you think I have seen the way you sleep? We have been sleeping together for the past few days, right? How can I not be able to tell if he's really asleep? Of course, and have you forgotten that you still have my power in your body? You can't lie to me, so don't lie to me in the future, especially about your body. Thinking that there was a spy in his body, the black-haired boy promised helplessly. The girl who narrowed her eyes and warned solemnly nodded with satisfaction. Then, she reached out and stroked the boy's forehead. After feeling the temperature slightly, the girl breathed a sigh of relief when she found that there was not much change. At the same time, she said apologetically, "It's okay. With Princess Royal Highness' curse, it's better than nothing. I feel ashamed of myself." As for lowering the temperature, it was even less. It was better to say that because of the side effect of frozen earth, Luoya had more curse vessels to maintain his body temperature. Looking at the girl's hand that just stroked his forehead, the black-haired boy couldn't help but remind her. However, the blonde girl didn't care when she heard the words. She refuted it in one sentence. That's right. Luoya, who was a little relieved, lay on the bed honestly, looking at the ceiling and brewing sleepiness. On the other side, the blonde girl looked at the boy whose face was slightly red because of his body temperature. She thought of something, suddenly lifted a corner of the quilt and put her hand in. Because of this unexpected attack, the black-haired boy who was relaxing suddenly widened his eyes. The surprised Luoya turned his head and looked to the side. He saw Noa Iyer putting her arm into the quilt calmly. At the same time, the boy felt a small and cold hand lifting his clothes and going in. Sure enough, I'm sweating. Is why I can't sleep. What's with the persistence? I'm here to take care of you so that you don't have to endure these things. This is... And, the temperature is almost there. Get up and take off your clothes. I will help you wipe your sweat. Grabbing his quilt, the black-haired boy's face stiffened. He really didn't dare to let Noa Iyer do this kind of servant work. However, the girl didn't mean to compromise. In the fluctuation of the curse, the holy white chain appeared faintly in the air. In front of the boy, Miss Angel once again showed an oppressive smile. Chapter 439. How many years has it been since an internal war broke out in the theocracy of Saint Mestre? Luoya felt that he had the right to answer this question. After all, he had personally experienced it last time. But what made him speechless was that after 200 years, the parties involved in the two wars were exactly the same. That's right, in this war, the Akkad and Heathcliff families were no longer passively defending. Instead, they took the initiative to attack. What was even more surprising was that according to the time of the news, St. John and the others should have made this decision immediately after the incident at Tucker Fortress. At that time, Brian, the head of the Eric family, was still alive and kicking. The war started so suddenly that when the news reached the hands of Luoya and Noa Iyer, both of them were stunned for a moment. After all, after such a big incident at Tucker Fortress, not only did they not send reinforcements, but they also directly entered a civil war. This was really a bit unbelievable. But after thinking about it carefully, the two of them found that this was the best way to deal with it. But at this time, if they did the opposite and joined forces with the Akkad family to launch a thunderous attack, then there was a great chance that they could defeat Eric in one fell swoop in a short time. And by doing this, they could also prevent Brian from sending people to assassinate Noa Iyer, who was far away at the border with no one to protect him. It could be said that they were killing two birds with one stone. But, how did Grandpa know that the aliens didn't make any big moves here? What if the alien army comes during this period of time? I see. Although this tactic sounded correct, it required great courage and determination to make the decision to go to war under the pressure of not sending reinforcements. If there was any mistake that led to the aliens' invasion, the two of them would be sinners of their race. The pressure brought by this kind of risk was not something that ordinary people could bear. Fortunately, because of Brian's plan, he led the cultists to attack Luoya and the others and died in this place beyond the Great Wall. Otherwise, with Eric's deep roots and the secret help of the Tasting Committee, even a blitzkrieg wouldn't have been able to solve this problem in a short time. But it had to be said that this matter had a great impact on Luoya and Noa Iyer. Now that the civil war had broken out, the two of them, as the only sons, had to hurry back. Of course, in addition to the two of them, there was also Brian, who had turned into a corpse, and a large number of cultists. These were all precious resources that the Akkad and Heathcliff families urgently needed. Although the aliens weren't fools, their IQ wasn't very high. As long as the walls were high enough, they could be intimidated to a certain extent. Of course, since there were no detailed building blueprints, Luoya could only imitate the Tark fortress from his memory. The first time he did it, he made a lot of mistakes. Fortunately, with the help of the Earth Mother, the construction progress was extremely fast. On the other hand, Noa Iyer signed many documents in his own name and established an alliance with the representatives of the various countries who came to support him. They signed a short-term joint defense agreement for the new fortress and established a frontline command center. Of course, this was just a temporary measure. Everything was done to last until the end of the war. Once the country was stabilized, Heathcliff would lead the regular army and take over. Then, these agreements and the command center would be considered to have been completed. On the other hand, Luoya didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the aliens wandering in the mountains had become more violent. What are you looking at? It's cold outside. Don't catch a cold. Looking at the girl who had been treating him like a patient ever since he caught a cold, Luoya's face showed a helpless expression. But he didn't listen to the princess's advice. Instead, he carefully examined the corpse and asked about the battle. After getting the results, his expression became more complicated. Strange? This. To be honest, I can't tell. But you said that they were more violent than before. Based on the season, it might be because of hunger or cold. Chapter 440. The rest of the journey went smoothly for Luoya and the others. Although the long journey had accumulated a lot of fatigue in the heretic army and the inquisitors, the team was more united than ever. Unlike before, the leader had given everyone a boost, making the journey a lot easier. After Noah Ayer's bloodline was upgraded, although humans couldn't feel it, the aura of the Angel King seemed to have a great influence on the higher-level monsters. These restless predators in winter didn't dare to come near, and the battle rate at night was reduced to less than half. Before dawn, the campfire was still burning in the camp. Under the light of the fire, the soldiers who were running back and forth didn't shout loudly to prepare for the journey. Instead, they were whispering to each other and laughing from time to time. The soldiers who were standing guard were different from usual. They were all smiling, and the devout inquisitors were already preparing to worship. Although I know you're tired from keeping watch at night, you can't fall asleep today. It's almost time. In the carriage before dawn, a blonde girl reached out her hand and touched the boy's cheek, waking him up with a smile. Feeling the touch on his cheek, Luoya gradually opened his eyes and apologized. He wasn't surprised that the girl was here. As the next Holy See of the Holy See, even if Noah Ayer couldn't make it back to the distant holy capital, he still had to spend the day according to the teachings of the church. The devout inquisitors did the same. As the biggest festival of the year, New Year was equally important to the heretic army. Naturally, they couldn't be careless about it. It could be said that it was the common wish of everyone to rest for a day. In the tragedy of Tark Fortress, hundreds of thousands of extraordinary people disappeared without a trace. This incident made both the inquisitors and the heretic warriors feel a strong sense of unease. Everyone, as witnesses of history, urgently wanted something to support them. Luoya didn't believe in this kind of New Year's wish activity in the past. In the past, it was basically just a formality. However, the shining figure in the sky when he was promoted to the source rank not long ago changed his mind. The warmth from the soul was still fresh in his memory. As everyone waited, the morning sun finally appeared on the horizon, emitting a dazzling radiance. At the same time, the people on the ground all closed their eyes and prayed, placing their wishes in the light, hoping to receive a response from the gods. Although it was said to be a stare, in fact, the boy didn't feel the stare. Instead, it was a feeling of being surrounded by a warm light. After a strange feeling flashed by, Luoya couldn't help but open his eyes. As a result, he found that the nearby crowd had already prepared to pray, and it seemed that a long time had passed. I didn't expect you to be so serious this year. You're completely different from before. Yeah, the time is already twice as long as mine. Speaking of which, don't you feel it? Facing the doubtful blonde girl, Luoya remained silent for a moment before shaking her head slightly. She felt that she might have seen the memories in her bloodline again. On the other side, Noah Ayer curiously inquired about the boy's wish. It's nothing. I just hope that the people around me will be safe. Recalling the departure of her loved ones, the blonde girl said with a sorrowful smile on her face. Seeing this, Luoya's heart ached. He thought about how to console her, but before he could say anything, a slender hand gently pinched the boy's cheek. I really forgot. It shouldn't be a problem. My wish is. I hope that I and the people I love will be safe and happy. Amidst the calm voice, Luoya, who was suddenly attacked, couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. After a moment of silence, the boy looked at Noah Ayer's blue eyes, his cheeks slightly red, and replied as if he was making a promise. You will be happy. Definitely. Chapter 441. 10 days later, in the morning, at the east gate of the holy city of Saint Maester, Lorraine, a group of people who had traveled a long way appeared in front of the city gate. Many of them were dressed in rags, and from their accents, it was obvious that they were not from the holy city. However, the guards at the city gate immediately let them pass after a brief inspection. Noah Ayer Heathcliff. When the princess of the Holy See appeared in front of everyone, everyone's eyes lit up. They cheered and immediately opened the city gate. Obviously, this was a rumor that was carefully designed by the Eric family to sway people's hearts. However, the effect of the rumor was very powerful. Although the Holy See did not make any announcement for more than a month, Noah Ayer's delayed appearance still deepened people's suspicions. The news of the princess's return spread like wildfire. When Luoya and the others entered the city, the east gate was already surrounded by the nearby residents. The knights in the city were dispatched to maintain order, but there were still more and more people coming from all over the city. The cheering crowd shouted the girl's name, and at the same time, they shouted the slogan of the royal family's victory. Puzzled, Luoya asked the soldiers of the city defense knights. After listening to their explanation, he realized that the Holy See had actually thought of the same idea as him. When the news was made public, the holy city was shaken. The families of tens of thousands of soldiers in the city cried and blocked the gate of the Holy See. They wanted to verify whether their loved ones were still alive. It was said that the scene at that time was extremely sad. The cries of women could be heard a few streets away. As the news spread, similar scenes were repeated all over the theocracy. Hundreds of thousands of royal family elites were killed or injured. The destruction of the century-old Tark fortress, plus the unknown fate of the royal family members. Any one of these conditions would be a heavy blow to a country. When added together, it could be said to be a devastating blow. No one in the world would use these as a price to frame someone. With such deep hatred and decisiveness, in everyone's opinion, they must have obtained decisive evidence. Therefore, although the Holy See had not announced any evidence, in the eyes of most people, this was already an ironclad case. On the spot, they were injected with adrenaline and entered the battlefield on the spot. It was like a parade in the Red Square. On the other side, the Akkad territory also responded immediately. The Akkad family's patriarch, Kadia Akkad, personally led the troops and set off on the same day as the royal family's allied army to attack Eric territory from both sides. After all, for ordinary people, the cultists were still within their scope of understanding. However, the truth of Tark Fortress being destroyed by the 6 disasters was beyond their comprehension. Once these terrifying monsters were announced, it would definitely cause a great panic. The black-haired young man thought as he moved forward. In the process, the number of people following him also reached its peak. The Holy See and the palace respectively sent troops to welcome him, but none of them were able to take the girl away. Because as the absolute ruler of the country and the Holy See, St. John was currently not in the holy capital. Brian had been famous in the Holy See for a long time. However, in terms of the origin level, he was the same as Kadia. If he colluded with the cultists and did something unexpected, it might have a great impact on the situation of the war. In fact, Brian did have the aura of an ancient evil god. St. John must have secretly gone to the front line because of this. After learning that her grandfather had secretly moved, even Noah Ayer couldn't help but show a surprised expression. However, she immediately calmed down and cooperated with the Holy See to act as if they were about to reunite. Of course, Luo Ayer also cooperated with them. In the meeting hall of the palace, the freshly brewed hot tea exuded layers of steam, dissipating the coldness of the winter. The black-haired young man looked at the battle report in front of him. After reading it, the serious expression on his face gradually disappeared. This war was a blitzkrieg that pursued speed. Therefore, whether it was St. John or Luo Ayer's father, Ka Dia, both of them chose the tactic of long-distance raids. The results proved to be very good, even exceeding Luo Ayer's and the others' expectations. As one of the 5 noble families that had always been deeply trusted by the royal family, the Akkad family had expanded the size of their standing army with the acquisition of a large territory 200 years ago. In terms of the number of troops, they had always been the leader of the 5 noble families. However, as the defeated party, the Eric border house had to be cautious. Recruiting troops was not easy because the army could attack. However, it was much easier to build defensive structures like fortresses. For the sensitive nerves of all parties, it was much less provocative. Whether it was to guard against monsters, bandits, or simply to station troops, all kinds of reasons could be used. Chapter 442. Outside the holy city of Lorraine's royal palace, the excited crowd had yet to disperse after hearing the news of the princess' return. The clamorous crowd was filled with joy. Meanwhile, in the royal palace's council hall, a black-haired young man was holding onto the battle report while gazing at the young lady before him. It was a pity that the princess before Luoya didn't show any signs of joy. Instead, she remained silent. Of course, the current civil war in the theocracy wasn't a prolonged war, nor was it a meat grinder where both sides were evenly matched. Instead, it was more like a smooth-sailing battle where one could easily gain merits. But even so, there was a part of the young lady's heart that didn't want to agree no matter what. After a brief silence, the blonde young lady clenched her fists and almost couldn't help but raise this question. However, after hearing Noah Ayer's rare question with slight anger, Luoya wasn't angry. Instead, he replied solemnly. In that case, isn't there even less need to take risks? Ever since you were injured, you haven't recovered from the battles and the journey, right? Instead of worrying about the battlefield where uncle is, why don't you calm down and recuperate? The blonde young lady said and walked up to Luoya. She extended her hand to hold the young man's hand and her eyes glowed with a gentle persuasion. Looking at the princess in such a state, Luoya didn't know how to reject her. Now that the battle saint had left the theocracy, Noah Ayer had too many matters to attend to as the princess. For safety reasons, the young lady who had just experienced danger shouldn't head to the battlefield. After all, Prince Kai-in was no longer around and Noah Ayer was the only heir to the royal family. Sorry, I'm afraid I can't rest yet. Although I don't care about the merits on the battlefield, there are some things that I want to confirm. The entrance to the appraisal meeting is at Eric's house. I want to take a look there. Gazing into the eyes of the black-haired young man, the blonde young lady couldn't help but tremble when she heard his intentions. Naturally, she recalled that Luoya had casually mentioned the chairman of the appraisal meeting, Collector. According to the explanation of the cultists, Collector had already predicted the calamity that would befall Tucker Fortress. He even took the initiative to set up a gate for the cultists in advance. That was why the cultists had the ability to enter the fortress. Absolutely not. The princess who was holding the chains pulled the young man pulled him to her front. Her slender legs knelt on the chair between Luoya's knees. She stared into the young man's golden eyes and spoke angrily. Indeed, that might be the case. But, there are some things that I feel are unavoidable. No matter how much I hate them, they will still suddenly descend, just like the tragedy at Tucker Fortress. The blonde young lady's expression changed when she heard Luoya's words. She couldn't help but fall into silence. The tragedy of Tucker Fortress wasn't something that could be avoided with one's will. But even so, Noah Ayer couldn't accept the fact that the young man had once again stepped into a dangerous place. No, let's forget about that. How can the strength of the Angel King not be a match for you? I just don't want Altacia and the others to recall the memories of that period of time. Besides, I can't bear to fight with you. You too, right? Hearing that, Miss Angel turned her gaze away in a fit of pique. Her cheeks couldn't help but blush. She also loosened her grip on the chains. The black-haired young man leaned back on the chair again. After gaining the upper hand in the emotional aspect, he started to think about how to persuade her rationally. Carefully recalling the various actions of Collector, the black-haired young man pondered for a moment before speaking. Why do you say that? Identity. According to the young lady's interrogation, the Collector was someone who was able to influence Luoya's bloodline and origin form. Although Luoya had broken through the shackles, this situation was still too strange. After all, if it was really the ancestors of the Akot family, then there was no need for them to hide. That was because Roy and Vincent weren't criminals. There was no need for them to observe their own family's movements. They would be welcomed back home directly. Then, the only remaining possibility was to trace back to the second era, the Akot family's main family, the Arde family. The other possibility was that they knew some kind of secret technique and were extremely close to the royal family. Whatever the enemy tried to avoid being exposed, they would need to investigate with all their might. This could be said to be a universal truth in the world. It was even more so when it came to information about one's identity. So, why would the enemy be so careful to hide their identity? No matter which it was, Luoya would need to spend effort to uncover it. Perhaps now was the best opportunity. Indeed, if Grandpa was here, although the mastermind of this incident was Brian, he was also the mastermind behind it. If we don't get rid of him, this incident won't be over. He wanted to use your death to start a chaotic era. I want to avenge you no matter what. A gentle but slightly angry voice echoed in her ears. His unwavering eyes revealed an unforgettable hatred. Looking at Luoya, who valued her so much, the blonde girl widened her eyes slightly. An uncontrollable heat began to flow in her heart, and she couldn't say any words of denial. Don't take any risks. This is an order. Facing the princess's absolute order, the black-haired young man nodded and gave a serious answer. After a moment of silence, the two hugged each other and felt the warmth of each other. After accompanying Noah Iyer for a few hours, the black-haired young man left the palace in a carriage after the crowd dispersed. He returned to the Holy Capital Labyrinth Hall that he hadn't seen for a long time. As the Akot family's residence, everything here was still the same as a few years ago. However, unlike the palace, there were no battle reports or other details of the war here. One of the reasons for this was that the princess forced Luoya to rest for 3 days. Another important reason was the rest of the pagan army and the interrogations of the cultists. In fact, in the last part of the journey, which was after entering the theocracy, a portion of the judges from the Inquisition couldn't travel anymore. They were temporarily arranged to rest in the towns along the way. It was estimated that they would only be able to return after a few days. This showed how rushed the return journey was. Lord Son of God, please allow the Church of Perseverance to protect your safety. This is not only the will of God, but also our personal wish. Furthermore, at this critical moment, we wish to participate in this war as a member of the Akot territory and fight for our own honor. So that's why. Although the pagan army had the same status as Luoya's personal army in the Akot territory, due to their identity as cultists, they would more or less be looked down upon. Before the war broke out, it was fine if they escorted Luoya, but after the war broke out, it was inevitable that they would be looked down upon. After knowing everyone's thoughts, Luoya naturally didn't have any objections. However, he still announced the rest plan as usual. The Blitzkrieg War had already reached its limit. The Eric family, who had the strategic depth, had already recovered from the shock. In fact, the battle report had already predicted that the war would only end in early spring. Even if it dragged on until then, in the history of the Shia family, it would definitely be considered a quick war. The pagan army might have joined the war late, but they would definitely fight. Perhaps, they might even encounter some unexpected enemies. The reason why the Eric territory was called a border territory was because it was located in a chaotic land where 3 countries intersected. Other than the theocracy, the other two countries were the Kingdom of Knights, Pender, and the Austin Empire. In the past, because of this special terrain, there were constant disputes. The land wasn't fertile, so no one was willing to take it. That was why the Eric family was thrown there. However, according to the latest battle report, the Austin Empire, who had always been indifferent to this area, suddenly mobilized their troops after the war started. Moreover, unlike the Kingdom of Knights, who only guarded the border, the Austin Empire didn't spread their net but began to concentrate their forces. "What is that emperor thinking?" the black-haired young man muttered to himself and frowned. Whether the dark clouds of war would come or not, everything was still a mystery. Chapter 443. In the study room of the labyrinth in Akkad, a black-haired young man read the letter in his hand carefully. His expression kept changing. Finally, he put down the letter and sighed slightly. That's right, after the outbreak of war, the Akkad mansion was empty again. After receiving the news, Dia immediately secretly went to the Holy Capital to meet with John of the Holy See. The result of their discussion was the outbreak of the civil war. After that, Dia's performance and actions were basically recorded in the war report. During this period, Ai Lizzie requested to go to the Tark Plains several times, but Dia refused with the reason of safety. After the outbreak of war, Ai Lizzie also set off with the army. After reading Anna's summary of what happened in the Akkad mansion, although Luoya understood in his heart, he was still quite speechless. After reading the letter several times, Luoya could only sigh helplessly. He silently prayed for the safety of his family far away and sped up his preparations. After deciding to go to the front line, the first thing that Luoya had to solve was the problem of the equipment of the pagan army. After the bloody battle in the Tark Plains, the entire army's equipment was damaged, which had affected the combat strength of the soldiers. Remember. Fortunately, although this journey was to help Noah Iyer, it was entrusted by John of the Holy See. Therefore, the damage of the soldiers and the damage of the equipment should be paid by the royal family. And it turned out that Her Royal Highness was also very generous. With a wave of her hand, she directly approved it. Not only that, but there were also a lot of rewards. For these loyal pagan soldiers, Noah Iyer, as the princess, highly praised them. She also received the three pagan leaders, Rodney, Wood, and Cynthia, and personally blessed them. She also called the Church of Perseverance and the Church of Strength, friends of the Holy See, and instructed them to protect Luoya in the future. After the ceremony, the pagan army held a carnival in the labyrinth that night. Looking at the excited pagan soldiers, Luoya was filled with emotions for a moment. The soldiers who came and went were no longer afraid of being interrogated. They no longer had to hide their identities in the bar. Now, they had gained the recognition of the owner of the city and even the country. According to the latest battle report, the coalition forces of the Akate territory and the royal family had arrived at Edgar City. Just as Luoya expected, after the two major cities were lost one after another, the Eric family had retreated and holed up in the city. During this period, the coalition forces tried to launch a siege, but it didn't go well. The black-haired young man heaved a sigh of relief. The stalemate seemed to be a good opportunity for Luoya's group to cut in. Due to the strange movements of the Austin Empire, the Saint Mestre Empire didn't dare to act rashly. The situation on the battlefield had come to a standstill. In the palace, the blonde girl looked at the news from the front line and frowned. On the other side of the wide table, there was another report from the distant Tucker Fortress. The Tucker Fortress was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. This was something that the people who enjoyed peace in the Holy Capital didn't understand. In the information that had been released, the Holy See didn't mention the specific damage to the fortress. So, let alone the civilians, even the nobles didn't pay attention to it. Only Noah Iyer and the others who had returned from the eastern region could truly understand the uneasiness of the door being left ajar. The eastern region is obviously severely lacking in supplies, but the civil war has taken up more resources. Moreover, it has unexpectedly entered a stalemate. What is the Austin Empire trying to do? Generally speaking, a country's military operations must have a goal, which was the so-called strategic goal. Under normal circumstances, it was nothing more than territory, wealth, and people. Since ancient times, wars centered on these three goals had been the main theme of human wars. But looking at the current situation, the actions of the Austen Empire this time were confusing. The Eric family was arranged to guard this place 200 years ago. That era was the era when the conflict between the Saint Mestre Empire and the Austen Empire was the most intense. To a certain extent, the Eric family was actually an abandoned pawn used to delay the enemy when the war broke out between the two countries. Because of this, they acquiesced to the expansion of the army and construction. But even so, this land didn't mean much from a military point of view. As for the people, there was no need to mention it. No matter where the Saint Mestre Empire was, anti-Austenism was an old tradition. In the eyes of the Austens, they were all unruly people. In fact, the Austen Empire didn't lack people. It was better to say that almost 100 years after the mutants' invasion, peace had arrived, and the population of all countries was very rich. Chapter 444. Austen Empire, capital of Theo. A moderate amount of snow in winter was seen as a good thing in most areas. The moisture of dry land was beneficial for the growth of crops in the coming year, which was extremely important for agriculture. However, for a city, snow would cause traffic problems, especially during this period of time. In St. Meister, where almost everyone was a Shia believer, today was the new year. Tens of thousands of people would gather to pray. In the country of scholars, today was the birthday of the God of Wisdom. Various schools would gather and hold a conference to showcase themselves. In the Austen Empire, today was the founding day. However, it wasn't the founding day of the Austen Empire. Instead, it was the birthday of the ancient empire in the Second Era. On the founding day, nobles from all over the country would travel thousands of miles to the center of the empire to offer their loyalty and blessings to the ancient race that had held the highest authority of the human race for thousands of years. A grand celebration would be held in the palace. The arrival of guests would even cause congestion in the so-called most prosperous city of the human race. In the splendid palace, a black-haired girl dressed in splendid attire stood alone at the side of the venue. Her amethyst-like eyes reflected the scene of prosperity and peace. Her delicate face was as cold as ever, but even so, she still attracted the gazes of countless young talents. However, it was a pity that this year was the same as previous years. The girl whose eyes and smile tugged at the nerves of everyone was still noble and cold. She was as beautiful as a snowflake, but she would also cause frostbite to those who wanted to get close to her. No one knew what kind of person could catch her eye, just like how no one had ever danced with her before. Lillian was believed to be the child most similar to her father, Emperor Lucas. They seemed to lack any feelings. However, unlike Lucas, Lillian had an inexplicable charm that made people want to melt her even if it meant risking their lives. The Austen Empire, this prosperous empire, was currently caught in a secret war. In front of Emperor Lucas, his 3 children used their strength and influence to attack each other, killing each other in the quagmire known as politics. The winner would get everything, and the loser would be at the mercy of others. After losing the Challenger's Cup, the black-haired girl lost a card that she should have had. On the other hand, Lillian's 2 brothers, Lucas Archman and Aubrey Archman, added another card to their hands. The 2 of them formed a temporary alliance. After the tragedy of the Tucker Fortress in the eastern region, a civil war broke out in the Saint Mestre theocracy. This could be said to be the matter that all the countries were paying attention to. However, under this spotlight, a piece of news caught Lillian's attention: the military mobilization of Duke Caesar's territory. When coincidences happened one after another, they might not be coincidences anymore. This was what Lillian had learned over the years. And today, Lillian's premonition seemed to have come true. Yes, Your Highness Lillian. Please head there as soon as you're done with your matters. After a slight nod, the palace noble who delivered the decree left humbly. Lillian gazed into the depths of the palace, her purple eyes squinting slightly. For Lillian, who understood Her Majesty the Emperor, this wasn't any special treatment. Instead, it was a warning sign. It was impossible for Lucas to want to see her alone because of familial love. There could only be one reason. In the noisy banquet hall, Lillian turned her head and glanced at her two brothers in the distance. Then, she turned around and headed into the depths of the palace. In the quiet corridor, Lillian Archman strolled forward. The girl's expression didn't change at all. However, her mind was rapidly thinking about all sorts of possible situations and preparing a strategy to deal with them. On the path leading to the inner court, the guards stood silently on both sides like armored statues. On the majestic door, the ruby in the eyes of the Archman family's double-headed eagle shone brightly. After reporting her arrival, the black-haired girl walked through the opened door and saw the only ruler of this huge empire. Any ruler of a powerful country would usually be a powerful extraordinary. Lucas Archman was no exception to this. However, unlike other countries, Lucas didn't show any signs of old age. This black-haired, purple-eyed man's skin was fair and lustrous. His body was well-proportioned, and his face could be said to be delicate. His slender eyes were bright and spirited, and he didn't even have a beard. Chapter 445. Saint Maester Theocracy, Saint Lorraine. It was the same lineup. When they entered the holy white city, tens of thousands of people surged. Countless people came to greet their princess. But when they left, it was silent. The caped warriors were silent. No one knew where they were going. Fortunately, the pagan army was not a force that attracted much attention, and the judges had long been used to keeping a low profile. The whole team seemed to be enjoying themselves. Those who did not know would find it hard to imagine that they were going to a battlefield. However, Luoya understood why. Whether it was the sect of Perseverance, which specialized in mercenaries, or the sect of Power, which used to live under the siege of the cultists, they seemed to have a natural acceptance of death. The harsh living environment gave them a strong resistance to pressure. As for the judges, they were the most devout Shia believers, but they also had the highest mortality rate among the various positions in the church. No matter how strong they were, any army with such a spirit could be regarded as a great teacher. On the battlefield, experience and skills could be accumulated, but a heart of steel was difficult to learn, not to mention that these were real warriors. Of course, they did not know that the tall woman who threw the small bag to them was a master who could become a general, and the old man who looked at them with a smile was a warrior blessed by the gods. Only the guards on the city wall who sensed the strange atmosphere could tell that there was something different about this team. Remember. In fact, Luoya and Noa Iyer decided to travel safely. The young man did not want too many people to notice their existence. Fame would bring too much attention, and it was inevitable for the generals on the battlefield. Although Luoya was famous for his personal strength, he still could not escape this iron law. Besides, the young man was confident that he was at the top of the blacklist of the Eric family, so there was a high possibility that he would be noticed. Rodney, when you were a leader, how many people have you commanded? Obviously, the number of people that the two of them commanded stopped at the level of a village fight. Although their fights could destroy mountains and rivers, the number of people they commanded was still a small-scale battle. It could not be called a war. As for the judges, there was no need to mention them. It was rare for cultists to band together like Brian did last time. Scum did not trust scum, and it was good enough that they did not stab each other in the back. Therefore, most of them preferred to fight alone. Therefore, most of the judges strengthened their ability to act independently. Although they were much more experienced than ordinary soldiers, they needed a good leader when they acted in a group. Yes, Luoya did not learn about commanding in the famous Saint Freya Academy, but in the study of the Akot mansion. This was the traditional education of the Akot family. The primary education of the Akot family was military chess, and it was divided into many different versions according to the difficulty. The first version was like chess in the previous world, and the final version was no different from a military map. Usually, Luoya and Ai Lizi would play a simplified version of military chess before bed, and every time Kadia came home, they would play a big game like an exam. Although Luoya lost every time, he learned a lot from them. At that time, Luoya did not have Pei Tila, the king of holy beasts, by his side, and the Gulan Daer consumed too much fuel. Therefore, this battle was a real battle of command, and the results were not bad. However, after that, Luoya did not display his talent in this aspect. The reason was simple, because the security of the Akat mansion was too good. This behavior of the Akat family was often interpreted by the outside world as abhorrence of evil. However, as the saying goes, family knows family. Luoya understood the feelings of his ancestors. In fact, they just wanted to play CS. After so many generations of hard work, the bandit leaders from all over the world had an epiphany, and they would rather die than provoke this group of lunatics. Thinking about some of the military strategies of the military experts in the previous world, the teenager could not help but feel excited. However, as the saying goes, if a worker wants to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. As a commander, Luoya did not want to go into the battlefield empty-handed, and reality proved that the system did not want to either. The bugle horn sounded, the war drum sounded, the first battle tempered in troubled times, nirvana in the flames of war. Chapter 446. As the saying goes, victory and defeat are commonplace in war. Luoya, who had fought countless battles in his life, could be said to have a profound understanding of this saying. But he had to admit that there was a difference between victory and defeat. In the tragedy of Tuk Fortress, the loss of over 100,000 regular soldiers was too great. Even the powerful theocracy found it hard to bear. This civil war could be said to be a desperate gamble. If they could successfully suppress the Eric family, the theocracy could use this opportunity to be reborn. But if there were heavy casualties, the turmoil of the country would be unavoidable. Thinking of this, the black-haired youth couldn't be bothered to hide it anymore. He knitted his brows and tore open the report. After quickly skimming through it, Luoya's hanging heart finally relaxed a little. To be honest, after reading the contents of the report, Luoya felt a little strange. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. In fact, the reverse was also true. Luoya and Kadia had fought dozens of battles since they were little chess pieces. So, Luoya had some understanding of his father's military strategy. Quickly ending the war, eliminating internal troubles, and gathering strength was the goal of this war. It was also the only way to revive the country. Although the theocracy looked calm now, in fact, countless people were observing the situation. If they couldn't end the war quickly and display enough strength, the nobles in various places would definitely think that the royal family had declined and would have thoughts of raising their own troops. Sir, did something happen at the front line? Perhaps because Luoya's expression was too serious, Cynthia and the others couldn't help but come forward to inquire about the details after thinking for a long time. In order to stabilize the morale of the troops, Luoya passed the report to Cynthia and the other generals. But, Cynthia and the others didn't come up with any useful results regarding the tactics at the front line. According to the report, when the Allied forces launched their second attack, the Austin Empire's military movements became more frequent. The army of the Schroeder family even crossed the border and entered the territory of the Eric family. Later, when they discovered that it was a feint, they retreated. In the beginning, Luoya was rather puzzled by the Austin Empire's reaction. After all, the young man believed that ending the civil war and allowing the main forces of the theocracy to advance east was the most urgent matter and the only choice to ensure the safety of the human world. But after looking back at history from another perspective, Luoya seemed to vaguely understand the reason behind the Austin Empire's actions. The Austin Empire's actions seemed suspicious, but if one looked at history as a mirror, they would find that the same kind of friction existed in the previous war against the aliens, and their goal was the same, to seize the leadership position in the Holy War against the aliens. There was no doubt that the Holy See played a decisive role in the continuation of the human race. But it had to be mentioned that during this process, the influence of the Holy See and the theocracy would naturally expand, and the number of believers would also increase. In fact, after every alien war, the theocracy would have a golden period of several decades, when its national power and influence would increase significantly. In other words, the only thing that stood in the way of the Austen Empire was the theocracy, and now, the theocracy was in an unprecedentedly weak state, so it was the best time to replace it. Once they succeeded, not only would the theocracy become stronger, the Austen Empire, which had the largest territory and population, might even use this as a starting point to establish a united human empire like the ancient Austen Empire from 1,000 years ago. This should be the long-cherished wish of the Ackman's emperors. This time, things are troublesome. Edgar City might be sturdy, but with the help of a level 1 source ranker, it was only a matter of time before it was conquered. According to the original battle plan, Holy See John should have made his move at this time, but now that Duke Caesar's army was interfering in this war with the excuse of having a blood relationship with the Eric family and an alliance treaty, Holy See John could not show up, because this was a trap. Either the Holy See will appear and start a full-scale war, and then reap the benefits from the negotiation table, or stall for time so that Edgar City can't be conquered for a long time, and then the theocracy will completely lose the chance to revive. This is an overt scheme. An overt scheme was different from a scheme that could be broken with a single poke. Even if one figured out everything, it would be futile, because an overt scheme was not easy to solve from the start, and because of this, there was no need to hide it. For this kind of mission, even Luoya, who had confidence in his father and the army, felt that it was too difficult. But as if it was really blessed by the gods, the theocracy's current situation was not completely unsolvable, because unintentionally, he personally struck a ray of light for this dark future, and that was Brian's death. Chapter 447. The Austen Empire's plan won't succeed. When the brown-haired head maid said that, she revealed a surprised expression. The black-haired girl also stopped what she was doing as if she had accidentally said something wrong. After thinking for a long time, the brown-haired head maid hesitantly reminded Lillian. She clenched the document in her hand slightly and organized her words. Although the so-called Allied army has performed well so far, it's mostly due to Marquis Akkot's good command. Once the battle situation turns unfavorable, this unstable Allied army may very well turn into a mob. Besides, our opponent is Duke Caesar's territory. Duke Caesar's territory. This name had some unique meanings. It indeed had an extraordinary status in the Austen Empire. But after thinking about it again and again, Lillian didn't change her mind. Replace the Saint Mestre Empire as the leader of the humans in Xia and make the Austen Empire the only empire of the humans. This may seem like a glorious goal that everyone will work hard for. But in reality, what's the point? Restoring the glory of the Austen Empire. Although this was a good thing that could benefit the entire country, the benefits were also divided into different levels. The commoners might only have more resources at their disposal and become slightly wealthier. The nobles' situation would be better, their territories would expand, and their status would rise. But in this process, the royal family would benefit from a qualitative change. The Caesar family should have received great benefits from the emperor by dispatching their troops. But even so, the troops were divided into different levels. It would be fine if they won easily, but if they were caught in a bitter battle, the Caesar family wouldn't go all out for the Ackman after weighing the pros and cons. The Caesar family wouldn't go all out if they had to pay a huge price to win. This was Lillian's judgment. But in fact, the Caesar family had another method that was almost certain to win. Thinking about this extremely low probability event, Lillian frowned slightly. She stood up and walked to the window again. Looking at the snow outside, she suddenly had a bad premonition. While muttering softly, Lillian recalled the appearance of the young man. She couldn't help but pray silently in her heart. In a distant foreign country, the black-haired girl stroked the name on the table as her thoughts ran wild. On the other side, under a candlestick, Luoya was looking at the information in her hand and silently thinking about many complicated matters. In short, the Caesar family was not easy to deal with. The ancestors of famous generals would generally have their descendants earn a living in the military. It was a common phenomenon among noble families for sons to inherit their father's legacy. The Caesar family was the same. They were one of the few major families that had grasped military might during their westward migration. They were also one of the founding families of the current Austrian Empire. It must be said that Luoya was filled with a sense of dissonance when he read the information about the Caesar family. He felt as if he was reading the history of the Achaete family. In fact, there were many similarities between the two families. This made the youth very vigilant. Of course, if that was all, Luoya would have been vigilant, but he wouldn't have paid so much attention to it. What made him feel that something was wrong was another piece of information that sounded like a legend. Under the leadership of such a genius, the Caesar family slowly recovered. Leighton Caesar's strength also continued to improve. In the end, he reached the highest level of source rank 1, becoming the strongest extraordinaire in the Austrian Empire. There were different opinions as to why he did this. Some said it was to leave opportunities for his descendants. After all, if Leighton continued to be a duke, his descendants wouldn't be able to train. When he died, the family might even collapse. Another said that he was tired of the upper echelons of the human race. During that period, the relationship between the Austrian Empire and the theocracy was very tense. It even felt like a war was about to break out. In Luoya's previous world, people joked that netizens only had 7 seconds of memory. This was the result of the explosion of information. In Shiya's world, where information was underdeveloped, people's memories were relatively long. But even so, it was a fact that Leighton's influence gradually disappeared over the years after he went into seclusion. This situation continued. The Caesar family never held a funeral, but no one cared about Leighton's life or death for a long time. However, what no one expected was that the legend said that he would wake up. After more than 200 years, this white-haired old man had overcome the vicissitudes of time and become the pillar that supported the human race. In front of the warriors who had long forgotten about him, he silently waved his fist and shattered their fear and despair. He crushed the ambitions of the other races and led the people in desperate situations to counterattack and advance triumphantly. He became a hero once again. Even if he was forgotten by the people, even if no one expected him, he still stood up when the human race was facing a crisis. This kind of spirit moved the young man. In fact, Leighton's return did greatly change the situation of the war. He boosted the morale and pulled the human race back from the edge of the cliff. Naturally, no one could object to the old man's decision. But this time, the people didn't forget about him. They wrote books and erected statues for him, worshipping him as a god of war. This was also the reason why Luoya could see so much information about him. Unfortunately, this wasn't a good thing for Luoya. Because the current him was no longer a friend of the Caesar family, but an enemy. Chapter 448. A military meeting. This was the solution Luoya chose based on his experience in his previous life when he encountered a difficult problem. He would analyze and discuss the situation and problems he was facing with the others. It was very likely that it would produce a complementary effect. And now, the young man was thinking about the difficult problem. More than 80 years had passed since the last holy war. The outside world had not received any news about him. Now that several generations had passed, many guesses had emerged. Many people believed that Leighton was still alive and was just living in seclusion like before. However, there were also people who believed that the legendary old man was no longer around because Leighton was injured in the last war against the mutants. Although Antonio, as a high-ranking human, could obtain more resources, the Caesar family was also a great noble. Leighton was still living in seclusion, and with the strength of the king of a level 1 source rank race, it was really hard to imagine that he was dead. And to Luoya's opinion, Wood and the others expressed their agreement. After determining that Leighton was still alive, Luoya next considered the second question, and that was whether the legendary old man would appear before him. But the young man and his generals could not determine the answer to this question immediately. After hearing Luoya's question, Rodney, who had been to the Austin Empire during his travels, was the first to express his opinion. Cynthia, who heard him, also nodded in agreement. The tall woman analyzed the mentality of the strong and gave such a conclusion. Beside her, Wood stroked his white beard and nodded in agreement. But in the face of everyone's unanimous conclusion, Luoya did not simply nod his head. Background? No matter how you look at it, the Caesar family's declaration of war this time is an important matter. If Leighton objects, it will not pass at all. And if he doesn't know about it, considering his performance in the last Holy War, I'm afraid the Caesar family won't dare to rashly send out troops because that might cause the strength of humans to be greatly reduced. The black-haired young man sighed, causing Rodney and the others to frown. The pagan leaders looked at each other worriedly. On the other side of the table, unlike Rodney and the others, Luoya had a deeper understanding of Origin Class 1. Putting everything else aside, at least for the infamous King of Curses from centuries ago, numbers were meaningless. Not to mention ordinary armies, even the legendary troops of the ancient Austin Empire that Lillian summoned could only be wiped out one by one. In the historical fragment, Luoya had indeed killed Prist, but that was under special conditions and schemes. Moreover, Altacia was still able to display her past strength at that time. But in reality, Luoya didn't have that advantage, and defeat was almost certain. Facing such a troublesome Caesar family, Luoya wasn't the only one who had a headache. Heathcliff, who had placed a lot of chips on the table, was also worried. John of the Holy See, who had once fought alongside Leighton on the battlefield against the mutants, clearly knew Leighton's influence and strength. So before the war between the two sides, he had urgently sent a group of emissaries to Duke Caesar's territory. According to the information from the front line, the emissary group this time was of a high standard. There were many well-known bishops in the group. But Luoya was pessimistic about whether they could complete the mission. Unlike the pious theocracy, the Austin Empire had actually inherited the religion of ancient Austin and worshipped polytheism. Luoya didn't know about the religious views of the Caesar family, but no matter how he thought about it, it was unlikely for him to communicate with pious and monotheistic bishops. But what the young man didn't know was that while he was worried about the outcome of the negotiation, the complicated situation of the war had changed. Chapter 449. The Vatican's emissary group was a distinguished guest to any nobleman in Shia. Of course, this was in general terms. In fact, the communication between the church and the nobleman was far more complicated than one could imagine. There were also many factors that affected the communication, such as the region. Due to the long years of hostility, although the people here believed in Shia, they did not feel any closeness to the Holy See. In the territory of the Caesar family, the fame and influence of the legendary hero was much greater than that of the Holy See. This was because the emissary group from the Vatican had sent a letter. In the theocracy of Saint Maester, there was only one person who could send a letter with this title, and that was John of the Holy See, who was also at Source Level 1 and was also considered a hero of mankind. Therefore, when he received this letter, even Berkeley could not help but change his expression slightly. He hurriedly took the letter to the depths of the Caesar family's territory. In this valley, the wandering elves could brush away the pain of the people. The time they spent here would also be different from the outside world. Living here for 10 years, the exhaustion of the body would not even be half of that of the outside world. It could be said that this was a disguised form of prolonging one's lifespan. It was also because of this attribute that User Valley had always been listed as the top secret of the Caesar family. Remember. The moment Berkeley dismissed the surrounding guards and stepped into this dangerous place alone, several monstrous ferocious auras immediately appeared in the picturesque valley. The violent elves between heaven and earth also began to become restless. Duke Berkeley's expression was solemn, but he did not dare to act rashly. He raised his head and looked into the depths of the valley, waiting silently. The next moment, a strong pressure suddenly rose from the mountain. Feeling the pressure receding, Berkeley no longer hesitated and strode toward the center of the valley. After walking through the field path, a familiar wooden building appeared at the end of his line of sight. Seeing this, the middle-aged man's expression became more respectful and solemn. He quickly walked into the garden, and on a chair in the garden, a white-haired old man opened his eyes as if he had just woken up from a nap. "Berkeley, why are you here again? What happened?" It was a letter from the Holy See, so he naturally had to pay attention to it. When he heard that the letter was from John of the Holy See, the white-haired old man's expression changed. There were not many familiar names in this era for Leighton, and there were even fewer of them who were his comrades. Writing a letter in his personal capacity represented a personal friendship. Looking at his ancestor who had fallen into silence, Berkeley slowly calmed down. He was basically certain that the letter was in vain, and the reason was simple. It was because the Holy See had misjudged. The military deployment this time was a major event that could affect the era. Berkeley, who still had an ancestor in his family, did not dare to make the decision alone. Leighton, as the hero of the previous war against the mutants, was recognized as the guardian of the collective interests of mankind. As the royal family, although the Ackermans' plan could benefit the Austen Empire, it could not avoid the fact that there would be internal friction between the races. Duke Berkeley was very confused about that. The middle-aged man found it hard to understand, not only because of Leighton's change of mind, but also because it had been a long time since his ancestor made such a decision. What could make his ancestor, who did not care about worldly affairs, have such a big reaction? Such a question naturally arose in the Duke's mind, and he could not help but pay more attention to it. As he gradually came into contact with Leighton about this matter, Berkeley finally discovered something. Berkeley was very puzzled about this. As one of the 5 major noble families of the Saint Maester theocracy, the Ackett family was naturally a well-known great noble family in Shia. However, the history of the Ackett family seemed to be incomparable to the Caesar family. They were a new noble family in the Third Era, which made them inferior to the Ackett family in the Austen Empire. There was also some big news about the Ackett family recently, and that was that the only son of the Ackett family, Luoya Ackett, won the Challengers Cup, broke the record of being the youngest champion, and obtained the noble title of one of the 5 nations. However, this matter that caused a sensation in the outside world was nothing to Leighton, who had experienced countless major events in his life. "Ancestor, our operation this time is," facing the middle-aged man's question, the old man replied after reading the letter. After hearing Leighton's words, Berkeley was finally relieved. The Duke, who was eager to take action, left the secret realm after receiving permission. After the man left, the white-haired old man picked up a document from the table beside him. Chapter 450. Under the moonlit night, Ai Lysiakot suddenly appeared in front of Kadia and expressed her thoughts on the current situation. However, in the face of the young lady's initiative to volunteer, Kadia hesitated for a moment and immediately rejected her. The black-haired man's attitude was firm. Hearing Kadia's words, Ai Lysi wasn't surprised at all. In fact, the young lady had more or less guessed her father's thoughts. The guilt in his heart made the Marquis rather send his own son to the front lines than let Ai Lysi be in danger. However, this was something that the young lady couldn't accept. According to the information that Ai Lysi had, Luoya had already entered Eric's territory. Ai Lysi could roughly guess what would happen next. The army was different from other organizations. Without Kadia's order, even Ai Lysi wouldn't dare to leave easily. Thinking until here, the young lady took a deep breath and gazed at the middle-aged man before speaking again. "I have to think of a way to get my father to agree, but how?" "Father, there are many monsters at the border between the theocracy and the Austen Empire. With my ability, I can control them to a certain extent. Together with the army of the pagans and the elites of the personal army, it is still possible to temporarily delay the enemy. As long as Big Brother arrives, the situation on the battlefield should be stable. Although I'm not an adult yet, there are many examples of this age in the history of the family, right? Big Brother was only 10 years old when he took over the family. What do I have? Father, after so many years, am I still an outsider in your heart? If Big Brother can take risks, why can't I? If father still treats me as a member of the family, then please give this mission to me. Let me contribute to the family in this time of crisis. Looking at the silver-haired young lady's reddened eyes, Kadia couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. If Ai Lizzie was his biological daughter, perhaps he would have immediately agreed to her request. But now, although the result of rejecting her was protection, wouldn't the process represent discrimination? Alright, Ai Lizzie, I'll leave that side to you. You don't have to worry about commanding. I'll send someone to hold on until Luoya arrives and you can come back. Yes, it's late. Go have a good night's rest. We'll set off tomorrow. The silver-haired young lady replied as she clenched her fists excitedly. She bowed and slowly disappeared. When she appeared under the moonlight, the tears in her eyes had long disappeared. She couldn't control her smile. 3 more days. Although there weren't many of them, only a few thousand, this movement attracted a lot of attention. Be it friend or foe, everyone knew that this was a force that could change the course of history. Intelligence agents from the theocracy came and went all day long, while Duke Berkeley personally came to Caesar's camp to observe the situation. Chapter 451. Inside the tent at night, the crackling of the bonfire was exceptionally clear in the silence of the night. The footsteps of the patrolling soldiers were accompanied by the crisp sound of clashing armor. The black-haired boy tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep as he stared at the ray of moonlight shining into the tent. He could only get up and walk to the table again. He actually sent Ai Lizzie to the front lines. What is father thinking? Everything began with the urgent report sent from the front lines yesterday evening. It was when the sun was setting in the west. When the troops were setting up a temporary camp, the urgent military report was sent by fast horses from the front lines. The contents were about the Caesar family's troops and their response plan, including Luo Ya's orders. If this army were to suffer a crushing defeat, then the situation of the entire theocracy would take a turn for the worse. On the other hand, if they could withstand the pressure, then they could end the war once and for all and prevent the Austin Empire from interfering. In comparison, Edgar City was not even that important. Ai Lizzie Akat. Although Luoya knew that he would see this name in the battle report sooner or later, it should appear in the intelligence department and the logistics department. It should not be on the battlefield, let alone in the center of the battlefield. After reading the battle report, Luoya almost cursed out loud. His rare angry look made the nearby soldiers stop what they were doing. When Cynthia and the others heard that it seemed to be a matter between family members, they all kept quiet out of fear and did not dare to ask. But even so, Luoya still could not hide his anger. Luoya naturally knew about Ai Lizzie's special abilities against monsters. If it were not for the fact that they did not have a capable army, Kadia would not have sent Ai Lizzie to the front lines. The boy understood this as well. But there were some things that only Luoya knew and was worried about. Sending Ai Lizzie to the battlefield at this time was simply cutting out a piece of Luoya's heart and frying it in a pot. After reading the battle report, Luoya immediately ordered the troops to set out that very night. The troops once again changed their route and headed straight for the border. They traveled for a day and a night. It was only after midnight that the boy ordered for them to rest. Judging by the time, they should be able to reach the front lines by tomorrow night. By then, the soldiers who had traveled for a day would definitely not be in good condition. But if they were to rest, Ai Lizzie would have to hold on for one more day. And when Luoya thought that the girl might be in danger, he felt unbearable. Could it be that I really have a sister complex? Because of this matter, Luoya once suspected that he had some different fetishes. But after thinking about it carefully, he felt that the biggest reason was the problem of trust. Or perhaps, the boy had confidence in Noah Iyer. He knew that the princess was powerful and knew that she would not be defeated so easily. But unlike the others, Ai Lizzie had been well protected by him for a long time. She had almost never been in danger before. Another sleepless night passed. The black-haired boy watched as the starry night gradually turned into the morning sun. After a short preparation in the early morning, the troops once again began to move forward. And in the distance, the chaotic situation of the battle was gradually changing as time passed. For Luoya, this night filled with worries was an unbearable night. And for the troops of the Caesar family on the border, this night was also an unusual one. But unlike Luoya, who was worried about his family, the troops of the Caesar family were worried about themselves. Looking at the hazy silhouette of the huge monster hidden in the night, everyone already knew its identity. And because of that, they felt that it was inconceivable. But now, a completely opposite reality had appeared. The Achates family did not become cowards who fled. Instead, they even roped in this monster that should have been impossible to rope in and attacked them. Duke Berkeley did not know the answer to this question. But there was one thing that he was certain of: the situation was far more troublesome than he imagined. The king of disaster was the ruler of the forest. That was why the monsters that attacked this time did not belong to any specific species. There were single-horned wolves, three-headed snake monsters, griffins, and eagle-footed bats that covered the sky. All sorts of monsters were summoned to the battlefield by the king of disaster. And the humans quickly responded to the situation. In the forest outside the battlefield, a silver-haired girl stood under the moonlight. The spell power around her burned quietly. Her eyes followed the light pouring down from the sky as she observed the chaotic battle in the distance. But to the girl's surprise, things did not seem to be going as smoothly as she imagined. Chapter 452. On the plains, under the reflection of the morning sun, the liquid ball emitted a different light than before. A large amount of curse power condensed into a high pressure that could destroy everything, and then it was released at a single point. Duke Berkeley had made his name in the Empire by sniping and killing the enemy's general before engaging in battle. Countless powerful extraordinaries had fallen in this almost unavoidable attack. And today, his target was the silver-haired girl in the army at the front. At least so far, there were no underage girls who had died under this attack, and there shouldn't be. However, in war, everyone was often unable to make a choice. In the face of various modifiers, everyone was just a life. With this thought in mind, the Duke waved his hand lightly, and with a sharp sound, the floating water ball released a fatal attack. When the water spear fell into the crowd, no one noticed it. It wasn't until the remaining power of the water spear hit the ground that the advancing Achates army noticed it. A sudden explosion erupted in the enemy's army. Instead of observing the situation on the other side, Burke raised his hand and prepared to give the order to charge. Ai Lizzie Achates. The information didn't describe this underage girl in detail, but it was obvious that a child of this age couldn't be a master, let alone a beast tamer. However, what he didn't expect was that in the smoke, the silver-haired girl didn't die. Bright red blood flowed on Ai Lizzie's arm, but the injury wasn't caused by the water spear that seemed to be able to pierce through everything, but by the girl's own dagger. The enemy was the famous general of the Austin Empire, Berkeley, a high-ranked extraordinary who was famous for his long-range attacks that could turn the tide of a battle. As the person in charge of the intelligence department, Ai Lizzie had already read this information more than 10 times. The intelligent girl already knew what the enemy would do when the situation was unfavorable, and as the commander, Ai Lizzie had already found a way to deal with it. Oath of Devotion. This was a forbidden spell that used a person's life as the price to attract long-range curses within a certain range. Usually, only the death warriors of the big families and a small number of cursemancers in the army would use it. In the end, using one's life as the price referred to life energy. A person's life energy was limited, and most people had about the same amount of life energy. That was why after using a forbidden technique, no matter if it was a high-level extraordinary individual or a normal soldier, only death awaited them. However, as someone who possessed a miraculous bloodline, Ai Lizzie had an almost unlimited amount of life energy. When the dust dispersed, the silver-haired girl revealed herself again, accompanied by Berkeley's disbelief. Ever since the fatal attack was launched, countless powerful enemies had been killed by it when they were caught off guard. The Duke could not imagine how Ai Lizzie had dodged the attack, but it made him think highly of the girl again. The middle-aged man with widened eyes sighed. Although he already knew that the Akkad family was a transcendent family that frequently produced geniuses, he didn't expect that an adopted girl could reach such a level. Berkeley's intuition told him that he had to get rid of the girl who was the commander. As his fighting spirit began to burn, the water ball emitting a pale radiance rose into the air once again. On the other side, white birds began to appear one after another. At the same time, a large-scale anti-curse wave rose into the air. In the sky, all kinds of curses formed dazzling fireworks, harvesting each other's lives. The water spears and the white birds chased after each other. After an entire night of waiting, the two most powerful noble armies of the two countries finally clashed. For the sake of each other's honor and the future of their countries, they began to kill each other. Ai Lizzie's strategy was to fight a war of attrition, so she did not linger in the battle. However, things didn't go so smoothly. As if they had seen through the Akkad army's strategy, the knights of the Caesar family were still entangled in the battle even after an entire night of fighting. On the other side, Duke Berkeley, who discovered that he could not kill the girl no matter how hard he tried, started to make a move. Wait, this is... At first, because of the fresh blood, the soldiers didn't pay attention to the wet ground under their feet. However, as time passed, the ground in the entire area began to turn into mud. The horses of the knights were unable to run, and the two sides of the battle became difficult to separate. After using this curse, even a duke with a level 2 source rank would not have much of his curse power left. This action was undoubtedly dangerous. It was equivalent to giving up the advantage of personal strength and trusting the soldiers under his command. However, it was also this action that completely raised the morale of the Caesar army to the peak. Since ancient times, soldiers would die for those who knew them well. Soldiers would also be moved by a general who trusted them. The impassioned horn sounded once again. The Duke, who personally went to the front lines, was like a sharp knife, nailing the Akkad army who wanted to break away. Duke Berkeley of the Caesar family lived up to his reputation as a famous general of the Austin Empire. He gave up on using his curse power to lead his soldiers. This seemingly reckless action was actually a strategy he had carefully considered. He had determined that he was the strongest person on the battlefield before deciding on this strategy. At the same time, he was also bait. In a short period of time, he made a series of decisive and correct decisions. He displayed his curse power, superiority in strength, morale, and military strength to the extreme. This could be said to be the true style of a famous general. Ai Lizzie, who noticed the difference in strength, could only do her best to deal with it. The two armies whose morale had reached the peak clashed once again. A fierce battle broke out between them. However, no one noticed that in the sky, a mechanical eagle with shining silver wings was rapidly approaching. Its gem-like eyes were looking down at the chaotic battlefield. The front lines could no longer hold on. After Duke Caesar personally went to the front lines to entangle the Akkad army, the intensity of the battle far exceeded expectations. The duration of the battle had also exceeded expectations. As the battle continued to drag on, Akkad territory's disadvantage gradually became apparent. Unlike Ai Lizzie, who had always focused on theoretical studies, Duke Berkeley was a true general who had been through hundreds of battles. His grasp of the battlefield was not something a novice could compare to. It would be very difficult to fight against him without similar or even greater experience. And now, Ai Lizzie had fewer and fewer choices. Just what should she do? The soldiers at the front lines were still fighting, but the soldiers at the rear suddenly stopped. Duke Berkeley frowned and looked into the distance with his sword in hand. However, he wasn't looking in the direction of Ai Lizzie. Instead, he was looking at a mountain ridge on the other side. The moment Ai Lizzie's attention was attracted, a familiar spell fluctuation suddenly tugged at Ai Lizzie's heartstrings. On the mountain ridge in the distance, a man and a horse were approaching. Looking at the white-hot battlefield and Ai Lizzie, who was covered in blood, Luoya's expression instantly became extremely gloomy. Overflowing anger burned his heart, but the young man didn't rush out in anger. Instead, he looked ahead and observed carefully. He knew that impulsiveness on the battlefield wouldn't solve any problems, especially when he was the only one who had reinforcements. Luoya, who discovered that the enemy had a level 2 source rank, immediately understood that the next day might be unfavorable, so he decided to set off first. As the battle between the two armies officially broke out during the day, Luoya's speed kept increasing. Now, he had left Cynthia and the others behind by nearly a day. With this thought in mind, AI Lizzie deliberately leaked a huge amount of spell and murderous aura. The power fluctuation that suddenly appeared behind him naturally attracted the attention of Caesar's army. Looking at Luoya from afar, the soldiers laughed at AI Lizzie's foolishness. However, they didn't know that this was the prerequisite that Luoya created to activate his skill. That was where the enemy's main force was located. The high-grade extraordinary sense of crisis once again rang. Berkeley looked at the rapidly approaching young man, his body emitted a brilliant light. A sparkling water ball rose into the sky and began to expand and contract under the pressure. At the same time, the silver-haired girl couldn't help but shout a warning. Whoosh! After surviving life and death on the plains of the eastern region, Luoya's power had taken a qualitative leap. Unlike the Queen of Witches in the past, the burning spell on Luoya's body had turned into layers of barriers according to his will. The flashing water spear kept breaking through the barriers and gradually deviated. Finally, it brushed past the young man. A violent roar sounded behind the young man. The spell on Luoya's body began to transform into a large amount of red light. In the steaming mist, white bones appeared one after another. The huge skeleton, like a demon god descending to the world, enveloped the young man. Under this huge power, Berkeley's body stiffened in an instant. At this critical moment, the battle-hardened middle-aged man released the last bit of spell in his body. The expanding water ball rapidly expanded and finally turned into a liquid wall in front of the young man. In front of the wall, the tall giant had also raised his fist. A fierce battle broke out between the two battle-hardened warriors. The vaporized liquid turned into an exploding mist, causing the soldiers to shout. The exploding lightning illuminated the faces of the warriors on both sides on the ground, causing a loud rumbling sound to be heard from the horizon. Has it begun? After speaking calmly as if he was watching fireworks, the old man stepped forward again. Chapter 453. On the plains, a hurricane was howling, and heavy rain was falling from the sky. This was the first time the two sides clashed, and the result was devastating. Red light wrapped around the thunder and fire, and the moment they came into contact, the flow of curse power was violently evaporated. The sealed liquid inside exploded one after another, and the surging water vapor turned into scorching rain, spreading in all directions along with the shockwaves. The Duke, who had consumed a lot of his curse power in the consecutive battles, was certain of Luoya's identity the moment he saw the Gulandair. A young man who could summon gods to battle, this was information that even Berkeley attached great importance to. And now, he knew what Luoya wanted to do. Just like how Berkeley targeted AI Lizzie, the young man also wanted to defeat him and win this war. Source Rank 3 and Source Rank 4 were two completely different concepts. If the youngest champion in the history of the Challengers Cup had not been promoted, then Berkeley would have been willing to fight even if he was exhausted. But now that Luoya had become a high-grade extraordinary, the sharp general had no intention of fighting at all. Although the well-trained soldiers were surprised by the low sound of the horn, they still began to retreat. Amidst the low roar of the giant, the Caesar army quickly retreated to the camp under the cover of the liquid city wall. Under Berkeley's control, the scattered flow of water produced residual heat, making the already difficult to move ground even more muddy. After holding on for a few minutes, under the continuous attack of the Gulandair, the blue liquid city wall finally collapsed completely. In the falling raindrops, the black-haired young man looked at the Caesar army that had separated from the Akat army and was retreating in an orderly manner. After thinking for a long time, he did not choose to continue. 1 second. Remember, the black-haired young man looked at the Duke of Caesar, who was still on high alert in the distance. He could not help but shake his head and sigh at the enemy's keen sense of smell and quick reaction. Of course, the most important thing was that the Caesar army was well trained. Due to the mud under their feet, the galloping horses slowed down a lot. The black-haired young man turned his head and looked in the direction of the Akat army. He stared at the silver-haired girl in the distance, and the string in his brain that had been stretched to the limit for the past few days finally relaxed. In the dark forest, a black-haired young man was listening to the report of the Akat family's general. He was carefully listening to the casualties of the army. Behind him, a silver-haired girl was wiping the bloodstains on her arm with clean water. Luoya had never imagined that his own army would be resting in such a place. After all, even an extraordinary individual with an innate talent for beast taming would be in awe of a forest that had obviously not been managed by humans before. Although he dared to enter, he definitely wouldn't dare to rest. After all, neither origin substances nor bloodlines would be activated while asleep. Demons that were powerful enough to rival high-level transcendence would generally become the master of a forest or grassland in an area, establishing a relationship similar to that of a co-owner with various demons. In the case of this forest, it was the giant eight-legged deer. Humans could not tame such powerful demons, and could only form a contract to help each other. However, this contract did not include loaning. As usual, Luoya could not find the answer to this question from AI Lizzie. Thinking about it carefully, as the girl's bloodline and extraordinary strength developed, there were more and more questions that could not be answered. However, Luoya did not care about this right now. At this time, in the command center's lounge, the silver-haired girl was sitting silently with her head lowered. Her eyes were staring at the ground, and no one knew what she was thinking. Even though the generals in the command center had already left, the girl did not come to Luoya's side like she usually did. Facing AI Lizzie's attitude, which was completely different from what he had imagined, Luoya was at a loss. Due to the series of unforeseen events that happened after the trip to the eastern region this year, Luoya and AI Lizzie did not welcome the new year together for the first time since they met. Normally, the girl should be very happy to see Luoya return, but why was it like this? Thinking of this possibility, Luoya's whole body turned cold. He wanted to immediately ask for the reason, but after seeing AI Lizzie's evasive gaze, he did not dare to speak rashly. Luoya's heart was filled with anxiety, but he could only pretend that nothing was wrong. Now that everything was arranged, Luoya finally made up his mind to ask AI Lizzie what had happened. Ever since returning from the battlefield, the girl had been thinking about this problem. Chapter 455. Source Level 1, King of the Race. But today, the pinnacle of extraordinaire that was almost untouchable had once again appeared in front of Luoya. It was the first time in a long time that he felt the terror and power of Source Level 1. It was a familiar feeling. The last time he faced this kind of impact was hundreds of years ago when he faced the King of Curses. But unlike when he faced Priest, Luoya was no longer a low-level extraordinaire that could be trampled on. He was a person who had transcended life and death and found his own source of power. The collision of the curse power between the two sides only lasted for a moment. Even the other people on both sides couldn't react in time. But this moment of confrontation was a critical moment that determined life and death. Amidst the fierce thunder, Luoya's body retreated rapidly. Layers of trees on the periphery of the forest were smashed by the teenager's body. The sound of branches and leaves snapping filled the air. In a few seconds, the lightning beam that crossed the plains and advanced 1,000 meters into the forest finally came to a stop. The remaining electric current crackled in the air, and the smell of burnt flesh filled their nostrils. The battlefield fell into a strange silence after this unimaginable blow. Whether it was the Caesar army or the Akat army, they were all speechless under this terrifying power. They understood the consequences of acting rashly. An unimaginable pressure fell on the people of the Akat territory at this moment. Everyone looked in the direction of Luoya, but their rationality told them that there was no hope. After all, even the talented heir of the Akkad family was only source level 3. 1 second, remember, cough. The night wind blew. Under the illumination of the forest fire, Luoya's eyes lit up with a golden light. The fire of curse on his body began to burn again, igniting the fire in the hearts of the people of the Akkad territory. How is this possible? The silver-haired girl was relieved when she saw Luoya stand up again. She almost cried tears of joy. Ai Lizzie, whose body began to glow under the moonlight, wanted to go to the boy's side to heal him, but she stopped abruptly halfway through the spell. Leighton Caesar, this old man who had only appeared a few times in history but had left behind an illustrious name for himself, didn't go easy on Luoya just because he was injured. An intense pressure as powerful as the might of the heavens once again assaulted Leighton Caesar. Even the dark clouds in the sky seemed to have shrunk by a bit. However, this time, the old man didn't rashly attack. Inside the forest, the black-haired youth didn't move for a while. In fact, the attack just now wasn't what this veteran was best at. And under the premise that he was aware of this, any rash long-range attack would just be finding a flaw for himself. Leighton's step was accompanied by a sudden surge of curse power and a drastic change in his appearance. In just a few seconds, his body rapidly expanded. His muscles bulged as if they were about to burst his clothes. Flashing lightning wrapped around his body, illuminating the entire camp of the Caesar army. Just by using his power, he could cause such a disaster. Obviously, Leighton's strength was beyond everyone's understanding. Even Roja's face couldn't help but become serious. However, he didn't care about these old people. A huge and blurry shadow appeared behind Leighton. The king of the race, a man who was on par with the gods. Just like when they saw the Gulandair, the people who witnessed the blurry shadow in the dark felt fear from the bottom of their hearts. They couldn't help but lower their heads. In terms of aura, this person seemed to be even stronger than Pulist. He didn't seem like an old man, but more like a man in his prime. The vigilant youth frowned. Sensing Luoya's concern, Paitila further strengthened his defense. Altacia also set up a barrier nearby. Surrounded by floating stones, the black-haired youth stared at Leighton with his golden eyes, observing his next move. Chapter 456. At the edge of the Sara forest, at the end of the Poka plain, everything was in a mess. The ground was shattered by the aftermath of the battle between the two, and a crack that extended for thousands of meters appeared. However, at the center of the explosion, Luoya, who heard the white-haired old man's words, could not help but widen his eyes. Is this some kind of test? No, it doesn't make sense. The Caesar family and the Akkad family have no personal relationship. This was something that Luoya, who has been managing the family for a long time, could confirm. Besides, the two families are even from different countries. Why would a powerful man who became famous hundreds of years ago be tested by him? Luoya frowned and widened his eyes slightly. He felt as if he had grasped something, and as if he sensed the young man's thoughts, the white-haired old man spoke again. Roy Akkad was indeed a figure from Leighton's era, but Roy was very famous back then, so it should not be strange for him to know him. In addition, Roy had disappeared long ago, so Leighton could say whatever he wanted. In fact, it was impossible to verify whether the old man was a friend or foe. No one would not be afraid of aging, especially for an old man who was hundreds of years old. So, was this some kind of stalling tactic? After thinking for a moment, the black-haired young man stared at Leighton and said with a calm expression. Relationship? Strictly speaking, we're close friends who can't reveal our relationship to the public. A few hundred years ago, the relationship between our two countries was even more tense than it is now. As the heirs of great nobles in each other's countries, we naturally can't have any relationship in public. But fortunately, we're still classmates, so we have many opportunities to meet in private. Close friends? But you didn't hold back when you attacked just now, did you? And this war, are you still going to use Roy to explain it? Looking at the young man who was still exceptionally vigilant, the white-haired old man did not get angry. In fact, he had already expected this to happen. But fortunately, Luoya had something he was familiar with that could prove his words. The black rose ring, a ring passed down from Estrid, was not a public item, and very few people knew of its existence. Roy hid part of his consciousness in the ring and waited for the arrival of his descendants. This kind of cheating behavior was even more impossible to tell outsiders. The white-haired old man sighed as he recalled the bitter battle. He then explained the fighting methods of the keeper's substitutes. After matching the old man's words with his memories, Luoya finally let down his guard. However, there were more questions in his mind. The black-haired young man's curse power didn't decrease in the slightest. He opened his mouth and asked the most crucial question. Hearing Luoya's words, the white-haired old man's face turned slightly serious. Looking at the wind of dusk whistling in the nearby space, the white-haired old man raised his eyebrows and said so. Luoya couldn't help but fall into silence. In fact, even now, Luoya didn't think that he had the possibility of defeating a level 1 source-grade powerhouse. Of course, if he wanted to defeat Luoya, Raiden would inevitably have to pay a heavy price. The black-haired young man pondered silently, but before he could ask the old man a question, a faint light suddenly flashed beside him. The next moment, a silver-haired girl suddenly appeared in the moonlight and hugged Luoya's body from behind. Ai Lizzie. Wait, why does this curse power have an inexplicable sense of familiarity? Not good. If this continues, won't it be a burden instead of a help? It's okay, Ai Lizzie. It's over. In front of the silver-haired girl, Luoya comforted her, and on the other side, the white-haired old man also withdrew his aura. The rolling dark clouds in the sky began to dissipate, and the smoke on the ground gradually settled as if the curtains were drawn for tonight's battle. The sturdy old man looked at the young man and girl in front of him and shook his head. He reached into his clothes and soon took out a quaint box. Luoya stepped forward and carefully took it after thinking for a moment. Defend? In other words, someone stole it. With excitement and curiosity, the black-haired young man opened the box in front of Raiden, and the unexpected item appeared in front of him. The night passed, and when the sun shone on the earth again, the camp of Akate Territory's army in the forest was noisy. The reinforcements led by Cynthia and others arrived on time, but what puzzled this travel-worn team was that the atmosphere in the camp at this time was not the tension of facing a strong enemy, but the excitement and joy of surviving a disaster. Just the traces of the battle between the two were as terrible as a natural disaster. Rodney and the others were secretly afraid of the strength of a first-level source-level Rodney and the others. And for Roha to be able to block Raiden, they admired him from the bottom of their hearts. Yes, this sparkling crystal was an item that the white-haired old man had kept close to him for many years. It was also the legendary item related to the fate of the Akate clan, but unlike ordinary crystals, there was a beautifully shaped ring sealed in the center. I remember Roy did say that this is an item passed down from generation to generation of the Akate family awakened. When he heard Roy describe this item like this, the black-haired young man's face suddenly became serious. For thousands of years, there were only 3 awakened in the Akate family besides Luoya. Even from the beginning of the Third Era, it had been treasured since more than 700 years before Vincent. This is... In response to Luoya's question, Raiden shook his head, indicating that he did not know. On the other side, the black-haired young man felt a strange connection. Looking at the ring in the crystal, Luoya intuitively understood one thing, and that was, this thing might be a catalyst for the historical fragment. This crystal seemed to be something like an isolator. But what kind of historical fragment would be so carefully protected and passed down? In the face of Raiden's almost certain words, Luoya had doubts. Although the old man in front of him claimed to be Roy's close friend, he knew too much. Under the young man's inquiry, Raiden finally told the truth. Raiden was not only Roy's classmate but also his companion who traveled together. This item is one of Roy's gains back then. It seems that he found it from an ancient tree man, so I can be sure that he has never used it. After hearing about the relationship between the two, the young man could not wait to ask about the truth of Roy's disappearance, but Raiden could not give an answer to this. That person has more life-saving skills than you can imagine. I don't think he will die easily. If Luoya was said to be an attack type awakened in the Akate family, then Roy was all defense and recovery. He could be said to be the model of an immortal body. But such a guy actually disappeared not long after parting with his friend. Where did he go? Or what did he want to do? According to Raiden, Roy had been thinking about one thing during the journey, and that was, how to woo the princess of the Austin Empire. This was one of the reasons why Raiden did not dare to say that the two were friends. But according to Raiden, Roy did this not because he fell in love with the princess of the Austin Empire at first sight, but because he wanted to obtain the blood of the Ace Man family. The white-haired old man gave such an explanation after deliberating for a long time, seemingly recalling the actions of his close friend. At this time, Raiden's face was slightly twitching, and his expression was very unnatural. Luoya nodded in understanding. Recalling Roy's words, if it were not for their blood relationship, the young man would have spat before leaving. But as the saying goes, one thing leads to another. Thinking of this, Luoya naturally remembered the mission Roy gave him. Thinking of this, the young man rubbed his temples and sighed. After thinking for a while, he still did not say anything about Roy's ancestral mission. He was not worried about Raiden. After all, Raiden knew the old scumbag better than Luoya. Luoya was really worried about the AI Lizzie behind him. Since he could not find any clues about Roy, it seemed to be a good choice to start from the enemy and take the opposite route. But what he did not expect was that Raiden said a familiar word. So that's how it is. Following Luoya's narration, the silver-haired girl behind him tightened her grip on the young man's arm again. The white-haired old man pondered for a moment, and for the first time, his expression became serious and he spoke of his own inference. Oh no, I'm afraid they have their eyes on you. Chapter 457. The believers of the Savior and the ancestors of the Akate family were sworn enemies who had been fighting to the death since the Second Era. During the crisis of the ancient Austin Empire's destruction, the fallen ones vanished without a trace and the Arde family was split into 7. But in fact, both sides didn't disappear into history. Roy and Raiden, this duo could be said to be the strongest of the younger generation at that time. They appreciated each other and after embarking on a tour together, they naturally crossed swords with the fallen ones. Bite them? Are you speaking from experience? Recalling the difficult journey when he was young, the white-haired old man couldn't help but sigh. As a result, he had a deep impression of the fallen ones. On the other hand, Luoya was inwardly shocked after listening to their experiences. The black-haired young man was secretly on guard. In front of him, the white-haired old man pondered for a long time before asking a strange question. No, it's just me. What's wrong? Recalling the black-haired, purple-eyed young lady with a cold expression, a strong sense of worry couldn't help but rise in the young man's heart. Although the possibility of Lillian being discovered as a member of the royal family of the Austin Empire and concealed by the kingdom source substance wasn't high, judging from the fact that the fallen ones had been enemies with the Akate family for a long time, no one knew what kind of strange methods they would have. While Luoya was pondering, the lightning on the tall old man's body gradually extinguished. His muscles, which seemed as though they were about to burst out of his clothes, contracted. Looking at Raiden in this state, Luoya hurriedly thanked him. I'm just fulfilling the agreement from back then. I didn't expect it to take so many years for the next awakened to appear in your family. But fortunately, there weren't any accidents and your strength is enough to successfully take over. The white-haired old man waved his hand casually and left this sentence before leaving as fast as lightning. Gazing at the flickering lightning in the distance, Luoya couldn't help but feel grateful and at ease. A legendary source rank level 1 character had turned from an enemy to a friend. This unexpected ending was a pleasant surprise for the black-haired youth. After the crisis was resolved, Luoya's body could no longer hold on. With the help of AI Lizzie, he returned to the forest. After a night of recovery, the black-haired boy's condition had stabilized. On the other side, according to the scouts, the Caesar army showed signs of retreating. Luoya, who had a lot of work to do, was not interested in this kind of power struggle between big countries. However, he was a little worried that Raiden's action would anger the Ackman family. But after thinking about it carefully, this little matter seemed to be nothing to this legendary figure. It would be more appropriate to say that Raiden's intervention would be more in line with the standpoint of a holy war hero. Luoya felt that this was normal. After all, a ring was a kind of personal item, and it was impossible for the Queen of Witches to recognize it. But what surprised the young man was that the ancient gods were as uncertain as Luoya about the material. Pei Tila suggested opening the crystal for her to check, but Luoya rejected it after some consideration. In addition, there was no indication of when this item could be used. The difficulty level of the historical fragments varied, and it would be very dangerous to enter when one's strength was lower. Although Roy said that he had to at least be able to injure Raiden to keep this crystal, Raiden's strength itself was a variable. In this case, Luoya should have just reached the standard. Big brother, did you become smaller? Behind the frowning and contemplating Luoya, a silver-haired girl walked over with a teacup in her hand. Her red eyes stared intently at Luoya, who seemed to have gone back in time 2 years. After hearing Ai Lizi's words, the black-haired boy also reacted. He raised his arm and found that his clothes were much bigger, and his hair was longer. Chapter 458. The Nation of Scholars, Leinster City. War and peace, these two things were always the products of human history. They were also the general trend and destiny that people of all eras could not escape. However, for the theocracy of Saint Maester, thanks to the outstanding performance of the Akkad family, the entire country successfully avoided the potential war and finally got a moment of respite from the quagmire. No, it should be said that it was precisely because talents from all over the world gathered here that the change was particularly obvious. Unlike ordinary citizens, most of the foreign students in this city were the sons of nobles, so things like political standpoints would inevitably appear in their interactions with each other. The older students could still maintain a certain balance between them, but this kind of standpoints was especially obvious among the freshmen. Shaking his head and letting out a soft sigh, the black-haired young man could not help but recall the riot more than 2 months ago. After fighting with the superhero Raiden at the border and claiming a family heirloom, Caesar's army did not take any more hostile actions. After Edgar City was conquered, the theocracy, which fought on both sides of the battlefield, won a total victory. And Luoya chose to leave first after taking a stroll around the headquarters of the Appraisal Association. Luoya had no objection to such an arrangement. After all, St. Freya's Academy was about to start. After experiencing the dangers of the eastern region and the flames of war in the country, the black-haired young man was honestly a little tired. Or rather, the holidays could be more tiring than school. Luoya himself thought it was quite ridiculous. Fortunately, as the war heroes who successfully stopped the Caesar family, Luoya and Ai Lizi both received the National Guardian Medal from the theocracy. However, since the two of them were not in the Holy Capital, after some consideration, the royal family of Heathcliff sent someone to send the medals to the Akkad family. The black-haired young man approved of this very much. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. The human world was not peaceful, and the country was not doing well either. And being at the edge of the center of power, Luoya's life was naturally affected. For example, the scene when he came to school. For a month, Luoya looked at the unchanging scenery outside the window and tasted the loneliness of life. Occasionally, she would even sigh about her physical discomfort. Only Cynthia, who came to ask about the situation, was able to talk to her. She was treated like a lonely old man. The reason why Luoya ended up like this was very simple: meetings. Now that the situation had stabilized, the meeting was about to begin. As the only legal heirs of the major countries, Noah Iyer, Xia Luot, Wilhelmina, and the others followed the tradition. Naturally, Luoya's side was left alone. The formation of a joint army, the establishment of a defensive zone, and the reinforcement plan. Just by looking at these topics, Luoya knew what would happen on the other side. Not to mention flipping the table, at the very least, endless bargaining and quarrels were inevitable, especially between the Austin Empire and the theocracy. Luoya was too lazy to watch these infighting. On the contrary, he had a lot of things to do here. The Academy's security department was still maintaining order this year. Since there were no people like Noah Iyer and Xia Luot, there were no disturbances caused by Paul and Luoya, so the situation was much more relaxed. However, the appearance of one person caused some commotion. Ai Lizzie Akot. When she appeared on the lawn square for the first time as a student in St. Freya Academy, she caused a strong commotion. Her almost irresistible charm immediately attracted the attention of most of the people nearby, and as time passed, it became more and more widespread. Looking at the girl in the crowd from the attic, the black-haired young man couldn't help but feel helpless. The current situation could be said to be within Luoya's expectations. After all, in the original, Recorder's Eye, the appearance of Ai Lizzie also caused some trouble. Although most of the noble students in St. Freya Academy understood etiquette, there were bound to be a few foppish or lovey-dovey. This was an inevitable phenomenon determined by probability, and Luoya's appearance here was to prevent this from happening, and at the same time, to make an example out of them. Looking at Ai Lizzie, who was surrounded by the crowd, an inexplicable evil fire began to burn in Luoya's heart, and as time passed, it became more and more intense. For some reason, the young man had a feeling that he didn't want others to see Ai Lizzie. The black-haired young man frowned and asked himself. On the side, feeling the fluctuations of power from Luoya, Paul and Jarek's cheeks twitched. They deeply experienced the horror of plotting against his sister in front of a siscon. Yes, brother Luoya, you don't have to personally come out for this small matter, leave it to us. Seeing this scene, Jarek and Paul had an expression as if they had seen a ghost. They could only sigh at the freshman's self-inflicted sins, and Luoya's face was completely gloomy. Thinking of this, the black-haired young man jumped down from the attic, ready to give the classic villain a lesson on behavior from a big boss. However, to Luoya's surprise, before he could do anything, several people suddenly rushed out from the crowd, and grabbed the gorgeously dressed pig-headed prince. No, that fan club should have been established after entering the academy, how could it be established now? Wait, your highness, this won't do. What Akot? Wait, is it the Challengers Cup champion? N? How could this be? Brother. The moment she saw Luoya, the girl who had always been cold and indifferent revealed a smile like a glacier melting. The sudden burst of gentleness made the surrounding people stunned, and also made the young man who was about to leave stop. This year, Ai Lizzie's enrollment was something that the Akot family had long decided. Although she was still a little behind in age, St. Freya Academy had specially prepared a test for her. As long as she could pass it, she could enter the academy a year earlier. For the girl who had been exceptionally intelligent since young, this was naturally not a difficult matter, and as Ai Lizzie's brother, Luoya naturally had to take care of her. Obviously, this kind of behavior was not in line with etiquette, and it was also not something an ordinary adopted brother and sister should do. Especially after Luoya left, the silver-haired girl seemed to have changed into a different person, revealing a happy smile on her face. Everyone who saw this scene understood Ai Lizzie's feelings. Because of this, after the opening ceremony, Luoya decided to temporarily go back alone, but he didn't expect Ai Lizzie to chase after him. Seeing the girl like this, Luoya finally couldn't help but ask. Looking at the girl who chased after him, the black-haired young man adopted the attitude of a parent and asked this question with a serious face. But unfortunately, this kind of Luoya didn't scare Ai Lizzie. The silver-haired girl revealed a smile on her face, and with a finger on her lips, she said an answer that Luoya didn't expect. What? Indeed, that would be troublesome, but even so, this kind of behavior is N? Just because it's troublesome. Or is it because of other reasons? For example, jealousy? Big brother, you're the one who's angry because I was stared at by so many people. In fact, Big brother only wants me to belong to you, right? The silver-haired girl said as she leaned on the young man's chest, and Luoya was speechless for a moment. The young man had to admit that deep down, he had a strong desire to control and possess Ai Lizzie. After all, strictly speaking, the girl was raised by Luoya, but his rationality told him that this was wrong. Sure, big brother, Ai Lizzie can become something that belongs to you alone. In the young man's arms, the silver-haired girl shyly whispered in his ear. Her back facing the young man's hand silently flashed with the light of life energy, but before the girl could do anything, the side doors suddenly opened, and a familiar voice sounded. In the cold voice, the black-haired, purple-eyed princess suddenly appeared and looked at the silver-haired girl. Stay away from him, Ai Liziakat. Chapter 459. In the empty corridor of the auditorium, Luoya stared in bewilderment at Lillian's sudden appearance. On the other side, the silver-haired young lady knitted her brows and was infuriated. The silver-haired young lady had become a student, which meant that she was no longer an outsider and naturally couldn't pester Luoya as a relative. And since she had become a student, Lillian, who was in charge of the security department and the Rose Council, was an obstacle that Ai Lizzie couldn't avoid. Senior, it's not what you think, Senior. Even though Lillian wouldn't bully Ai Lizzie with her identity, the two of them had been on bad terms ever since they met, so it was too risky to keep them together. But what Luoya didn't expect was that the silver-haired young lady agreed. Ai Lizzie narrowed her crimson eyes. Under the unanimous request of both parties, Luoya could only nod and leave. After the door at the end of the corridor closed, Lillian's gaze sharpened and she asked softly. Remember. Your Highness Lillian, shouldn't I be the one asking you that? Even though you're my senior, can an outsider like you not disturb my emotional exchange with Big Brother? Please have some self-awareness. What did you say? Looking at the silver-haired young lady, Lillian's attitude was casual as though she were full of confidence and abundance. Her purple pupils swept a glance at the hand that Ai Lizzie hid behind Luoya's back and said as expected. The black-haired young lady said with some sympathy in her purple pupils. However, this contempt and pity completely infuriated Ai Lizzie. What? Are you unwilling? Jealousy makes people ugly, Ai Liziakat. Hee, are you envious? That's right. This is something that you can't have. In the morning, I can wake up with a kiss on his cheek. At night, I can fall asleep in his arms. Unlike a certain lonely old woman, my life is very fulfilling. The silver-haired young lady kept recounting their intimate actions when they were alone, while the black-haired young lady remained silent. Recalling her conversation with Emperor Lucas, Her Highness couldn't help but lower her head and clench her fists. However, this didn't stop the silver-haired young lady from attacking. What? Can't take it anymore? Then let me return your words to you. Jealousy makes people ugly. Lillian Archerman, now that things have come to this, you should understand that it's impossible between you and Lord Brother. Under Ai Lizzie's constant stabs in her heart and her decisive silence, the black-haired young lady finally couldn't take it anymore. Armored knights surged out from behind Lillian along with violent spell power fluctuations. On the other side, the silver-haired young lady's body glowed and a silver-white bird began to spread its wings on her shoulder. You're the one who's jealous. You're just a fake. Because of Luoya, I've been enduring. Don't push your luck. Lillian's sarcastic retort accurately stepped on the silver-haired girl's minefield, causing Elisa to gnash her teeth in anger. Two pairs of purple and crimson eyes stared at each other, and the anger between them grew stronger and stronger. However, just as the two of them were about to attack, the tightly shut door suddenly opened again. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.